If anybody's here to speak on things, maybe fill out one of those little cards and hand them up to us so that we can keep the public comment moving along. And then I guess the first item is the agenda, or the minutes.
I will move to approve the minutes.
Second.
Okay, we need a roll call. So Amy,
Yes.
Carolyn,
Agree.
Matt,
Yes.
Weston,
Yes.
Sarah,
Yes.
Adrian? Okay. Clark
I also abstain. I wasn't at the meeting.
and Andres.
I will also abstain.
So it passes unanimously. Then we'll move on to our first item is the exchange plan development at approximately 320 East, 400 South.
I actually don't really have anything to report, so we're okay.
Just following protocol.
Hello. So this is a project by Downtown Salt Lake City Partners. They're the developer representing the applicant, which is Salt Lake City Corporation. They are requesting a plan development and conditional building and site design at approximately 320 East, 400 South. That's in the TSA Urban Center Core zoning district. And the exchange development consists of two buildings. They're commonly referred to as Buildings A and Buildings B, and they'll be developed in phases. The one before you this evening is Building A, Phase 1, and it's for a 9-story structure with over 15,000 square feet of retail and approximately 286 units. Staff is recommending approval of the project with conditions. Just to orient you to the site, here is the proposed site plan. And then there's some photos of the existing site. It's currently occupied by the old Barnes Bank building, the former Salt Lake City Roasting Company that's actually hidden behind those trees. I don't know if you can see it very well. And then there's an existing parking structure ramp on the site that you'll see better in the next photo. The parking ramp structure is that cement wall-looking building on the bottom photo. And then the top photo is from Blair Street looking north. And through the plan development process, the applicant's requesting 5 feet of additional building height, and they are requesting modifications to design standards through the conditional building and site design process. The design standards are the active ground floor use and visual interest, the ground floor glass requirements, the distance between each ground floor building entrance, and the maximum length of a street-facing facade. And a chart outlining all of the specific requests as well as staff's analysis and findings related to each of the design standards is located in attachment G of the staff report. The first time this project came before the Planning Commission was for a work session on September 12th to get some initial feedback on the proposal from the Planning Commission. Following the work session, staff provided a summary of some of the comments as well as next steps to the applicant. And the following revisions were made to the proposal. Initially, they were requesting to exceed the maximum length allowed for a blank wall, and following their revised proposal, you can see their before elevation on the left and their revised elevation on the right. Those are the 300 East elevations. A modification to that standard is no longer needed. And then they also provided some additional information on some of the outdoor treatments and landscaping areas on 4th South and People's Way. That's not a revision to the proposal, but they did provide more information to help convey the design of those areas. And during the work session, staff did identify some concerns with the request for the increased facade length on 400 South. This design standard allows for a maximum street-facing facade length of 200 feet. and calls for a 20-foot separation with a 5-foot pedestrian pathway in between buildings that have a 200-foot facade length. The request is to exceed the maximum facade length by 77 feet along 4th South. The intent of this design standard is to break up the overall mass of the building. The upper levels of 4th South utilize variations in colors, materials, recessed windows, and projecting balconies. And there's approximately 52 feet of the upper 3 stories that will serve as rooftop terrace space. And this area is set back approximately 28 feet from the facade. The ground floor also has 80% glass on this elevation. But there is minimal articulation on those lower levels. And so as a condition of approval for the request to exceed the facade length, staff is recommending a recessed area minimum of 20 feet in length and 5 feet minimum depth to break up that wall plane, and in order to meet the intent of that design standard. In addition to that, as a condition of approval, staff is also asking the commission to delegate final approval details regarding landscaping, lighting, and loading areas to planning staff. Landscaping plans were submitted, but information shown doesn't include all of the required plantings along Blair Street, and some calculations are needed in those areas. The applicant has indicated that the existing trees along Blair will be removed, and so we just need some additional information to ensure compliance with the landscaping standards of the conditional building and site design review. And then the existing lighting along Blair is also proposed to be removed, and so the applicant will need to coordinate with the city's public utility department to remove those. And then following the publication of the staff report, we got some additional information from the applicant related to the Plan Development Standard E, which deals with mobility and access of the site, and specifically related to the loading and service areas. So the applicant initially was planning to have bins collected off of Blair Street, but some other options will need to be explored because of the impact to Blair Street that the amount of trash from that building would require. So again, staff's asking to delegate those things to planning staff. The loading areas wasn't initially included in our initial motion, so that's something that would need to be added if you went with the recommended motion. And staff has reviewed the proposal against the plan development standards, the standards for conditional building and site design, as well as the modifications to the design standards and the intent of those standards, and is recommending approval of those with conditions as listed in the recommended motion, with the addition of the loading area details. And I can answer any questions if you have any. The applicant's also here.
The 300 East blank wall situation that seems to be remedied from the work session to now.
Yeah.
Can you just explain, because I'm just looking at the two illustrations, yeah, they're up there, and can you explain the I don't even really see the problem on the first picture, and then how maybe it was rectified in the second one?
So the first picture, one of the design standards says that there can't be a maximum wall length longer than 15 feet. So their initial request was for that area that's highlighted in yellow is approximately 30 feet. So that's something they were requesting. It's their stairwell, and so they didn't want windows or anything, but with the addition of art and the definition of that standard, the revision resolves that, and so they're not requesting a modification anymore.
I gotcha.
I went
So there
through
will-
these so that you could see what had been changed from the work session till today.
So there will have to be a mural on that space.
Yeah, I believe the mural that they've shown in this photo is just for illustrative purposes, but as a condition, we've asked that for specific square footage to ensure that it meets the requirements of the blank wall, maximum blank wall area.
Thanks.
And what was that? I was thinking too much, I guess.
Okay.
The other thing that you asked to add to the staff.
It's related to the Plan Development Standard E, which deals with mobility of the site, and so it's to deal with loading and service and access.
In the service stuff, okay.
So this might be minutia, but I see it's being called the Exchange. That area around Green Pig, I've always heard that. I mean, it's the Exchange Plaza, it's used, is that, and do we care about names? Is
Yeah,
that
it's-
not?
that's Exchange Place, right? And it's right on the same road.
So,
The
I mean,
applicant might
I
be
just-
better able
It
to
doesn't
speak
matter?
to that.
Okay. Bugs me.
I agree. It's it's pretty close by that. It's on the same street. for
Right,
heaven's
it's
sake.
just a couple blocks away. I just wondered if that's something we needed to care about. I guess we don't.
Can we talk a little bit about the length of the facade on 400 South?
Sure.
And I know that this recommendation is that it's okay because of the variation in the facade and the materials used and that sort of thing. I seem to remember in your presentation here that, and perhaps in here as well, that the purpose for that standard was to require, or actually you would have to have some sort of walkway in between buildings. Is that correct? So the idea was if you had something that was 200 feet, you would then have to have a walkway, or if you want to do something bigger than that, then you'd have to have a walkway to break it up. Is that correct?
So the actual design standard is, yeah, it has to be a space, if a building's 200 feet, it has to have a space of 20 feet, and 5 of that 20 feet has to be a pedestrian walkway. They are requesting a modification to that through this conditional building and site design process. So if they can show that the intent of that standard's being met, which is, to break up the wall plane of that building, then if the commission thought that their proposal met that requirement, it could grant a modification to that. So that's why, as a condition of approval, we've recommended that they recess a distance of a length of 20 feet, a minimum depth of 5 feet. 5 feet, if that makes sense.
So you're just to emphasize the point. So you're saying that, in your opinion, the breaking up the facade with different articulation and varying whatever.
20 feet, like 20.
No, go ahead.
20 feet wide hole. Or a 5 foot wide hole that goes 20 feet back. Is that what the?
No, a 20-foot wide hole that goes 5 feet back.
And so my question is that, so you're saying that is arguably equivalent to an actual street and walkway that would go between, because it seems like that's the intention, is that we're really breaking it up with something major, and what we're allowing to have happen is something that's, I guess I would argue, is not really that close.
So the intent of that regulation was actually to break up our blocks so that we can get walkways through. In this case, we have Blair Street that already does that. Further, on other developments on 400 South, we weren't getting that, and that's why that was put in. But where we already have those walkways and streets in place, then we feel like that block has met the intent of that requirement.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Thank you. Thanks.
So on that with 400 South, can you also kind of point out and outline where the doors are laid out? Because I recognize also that we're not only are we having this long facade, but we're also not having entryways kind of scattered along it. And can you kind of point that out for us and describe? You say that the intent is better designed, and describe your reasoning behind that.
The applicant's argument is that that they've proposed the same distance that would be required, or the same amount of doors that would be required for the whole project. They've just been spread out in a different way. And part of that, I believe, is because if they were to say put, a door every 40 feet, if it was exactly 40 feet, or say 46 feet, whatever the ordinance allowed, the door might be like in one of the architectural features, like the pillar that comes down. So the largest gap, I believe, is on 4th South, and it's approximately 86 feet. And then the others vary. Some are 40 feet, some are 60 feet. But the actual distance divided by a door every 40 feet, they meet that requirement, but they've added more doors along People's Way. So they've just spaced them out differently.
Anybody have anything else? I guess we'll let the applicant come up. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Chris Parker with Give Group.
I'm Michael Glomboski with Domain Companies.
Thanks for hearing us. I think we don't really disagree with anything in Amy's report. We're really excited for this building. It's kind of when I think of what I would like in a TSA district, a massively mixed-use, mixed-income structure that has retail on 3 sides is kind of what I would hope had been built, will be built. And I think perhaps this body might agree. The only one thing that we would ask that is different from the staff report is on the breakup of the facade of 400 South. Since we got the report that would be one of the requests, we've gone back and seen what that would do to the insides of the building. And it actually kills several units that have their bedrooms on that wall that would have to come back an additional X amount of feet. I think we completely understand the intent of that, but I was wondering if we might be able to move that condition, which is currently the only hard condition, to a staff review condition like the other ones, so that we can go ahead and kind of work through those in a way that still allows the project to get built, but provides that sort of, kind of visual breakup on the pedestrian level that I think is the intent.
Yeah, and just to clarify on that elevation a little bit more and the way we attempted, we've worked with staff on this for since the previous meeting, and I think before that and just initial design. It's a tough project because the block is very large and long, and trying to activate it all as best as we can. And the way the building currently lays out, it's hard to see on that small plan, but if you look at the renderings, coming from 300 towards Blair, so look at the corner right there, we basically have one building mass that sort of foots down at the corner that comes in about 20 feet into the 400 South side of the building. But if you take it from the corner of the building all the way to our this recess we're being asked to provide, that first low area of GFRC is roughly 155 feet. Then we hit where our lobby entrance is, which is 33 feet wide and set back about 3 feet from that front face of the building, which is the GFRC. So essentially right now as designed, we have a 33-foot wide, 3-foot setback. The provision that they've asked for, as Chris mentioned, is this 5-foot setback, which then cuts into 7 units above the lobby. Also parking spaces on the second floor. So, but again, to point out the massing and the way it was designed is we essentially have, in material-wise, 3 buildings. One that's 155 feet long, the 33-foot sort of niche for the entrances to the main lobby, and then an 85-foot section that extends from the lobby to Blair Street. And along the street line, like on the sidewalk, it's called the GFRC, is at 0 at our 10-foot back from the property line. From there, we step back at points 2 feet and 3 feet to add the sort of activation on the street.
Architect, that was
Yeah.
a lot of words for me.
We also have about 7 different materials going on, from the metal panel, the GFRC, if you consider the storefront a material. We have wood paneling in our garage to screen the garage right above that. We have the canopies. Again, at the entrances, we have 5-foot canopies to accentuate them. And also at the entries, when the building returns, is a corrugated metal panel. So it's another material that sort of signifies that recess and entry point. So,
Talk me through 400 South
Mhm.
and that whole facade, and how you see people moving in and out and around, and how you are activating 400 South. And here's my concern, I mean, from the get-go, because that's really the longest part of the building.
Mhm.
What's happening in 300 East, you're asking for an additional 10 feet, 14 feet. It's not a huge request, but we have had a history of a number of buildings built on 4 South that are really turning that into nothing but a thoroughfare.
Sure.
And it's, maybe that's what it is, but it feels like that street is just becoming not a pedestrian-friendly
Right.
sort of area. And so, and it's just getting these massive buildings are kind of scraped up along the sides. And I'm just kind of curious, I mean, so help me, how have you kind of addressed where 400 South remains kind of an atmosphere that's part of the community and it's not just this like walled off?
Sure. As she mentioned in the presentation, we provided some more information on the landscaping that's happening there. Another critical and difficult issue with the site is elevation changes across the length, both going east-west and north-south. So we essentially have two levels of sidewalks. The one up against the building sort of runs, and makes up for the elevation change across the block. But to answer your question, and also probably the question about the door spacing, we're currently working on that main corner retail being a food hall, and
So
hence it being
4th
so big.
South and 30 East? Or-
Exactly.
okay.
A food hall with a local vendor potentially being the lead on that, but that's TBD. We've also asked about or had some other consultants from New Orleans that have done food halls there, but that's why that retail block is so big. It basically spans from the corner all the way to the main building entrance. That'll be a highly active space with people going in and out for meals all hours of the day.
They only enter off of 4 South, or can they also enter off of 3rd?
There is basically on 3rd, we have a severe kind of elevation change we're making up for. And so it's pretty difficult to get, without stepping the slab on the interior of the building, to have an entrance on that side with the way civil design works for the sidewalks. So currently there is no door up against the building on that side. We actually have a great sloped walk to get from the low sidewalk up to the elevation of that slab for that corner retail.
So in that retail 2 spot, that really big open
Mhm.
large space, it's what, 53 by,
Roughly 150 feet.
that primary entrance where people are going to be coming is in and off of 4 South.
Correct. All 3 entrances for that are off of 4 South.
Is that going to be, and you envision that, or is that one retail space, or is it going to be subdivided into?
No, that is
multiple?
going to be one food hall. So
And then the retail 1 on Blair Street, is that main entrance off 4 South, or is the main entrance of that off Blair Street?
there. We have entrances on both streets for that one because that one's nearly at the grade with the sidewalk. So we don't have as much of a challenge making up the elevation to get in and out of that retail stall.
Your leasing office is along 4 South.
Correct.
Okay.
So like on this drawing where it says the exchange, that's where the leasing office is?
I'm not sure which drawing you're looking at,
Oh,
but to answer your question about, sorry, excuse me,
A03?
I guess go to the previous page. To answer your question about the building name, the exchange was the name of the project we gave when we did the RFP. Both buildings will have their own names, which are still to be determined. So it will not be the exchange.
Yeah, well, I'm just
That was
trying
the
to-
name of our application for the RFP. So
Okay, I'm just trying to picture looking at that. So is that where the entrance is going to be?
correct.
For
And this
all your,
and this is an older rendering. We didn't have the time to update it between the last meeting and this meeting. But that's not showing the 3-foot recess. That's still showing the old 2-foot recess. And that also does not render the sidewalk the sidewalk elevations accurately.
okay, yeah.
It's a pretty difficult thing to model to render.
On the bottom right is kind
Yeah.
of what the sidewalk feel will be for the length of 400 South. So the pedestrian experience isn't just flat asphalt. It actually slopes quite a bit, and the way that we've made up those slopes are these articulating planter boxes.
Yeah. Going from Blair to 300, it slopes towards 300. So basically the corner of 300 is a little bit higher than the main pedestrian sidewalk.
Because the whole valley goes like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what those sections represent, is basically the 2 different sidewalk elevations. The building one and the pedestrian one. So if we pushed the line, that 33-foot area of our building entrance, so right now you have this gray metal panel that comes across and comes all the way to the ground. That signifies sort of the building entrance. What's being recommended is trying to push that area back to 5 feet.
And you
Which-
can go to where? 3 feet or 2 feet?
Right now we're at 3. So if we go to 5, that takes 2 feet out of 7 units going up. It also would kill, I think it's 4 to 5 parking spots in the garage because we don't have enough drive aisle space then to keep those spots.
And part of that's just the way that the building is designed. You basically have this, you know, library hinting at plane on the front, and then you have a whole recessed blue panel. So if we were to take that, you basically have to take all the blue and push it back to follow the vernacular of the architecture. And so that means that all of those units that might have, say, an 11-foot bedroom on them, which a lot of them do, get a 9-foot bedroom, which trying to rent that as a kind of a high-end market unit is not going to be easy. So you end up getting rid of units so you can flatten them and spread them out so you still get kind of the size you need to rent them. It ends up being, it sounds like a little thing, but ends up being kind of a big thing, practically speaking.
We could, I talked to the architects about, when we got the staff report a couple days ago and this 5-foot request came up, and we kind of tried to analyze it, but we could approach 5 feet, like just at the first floor with the entrance glass. We can continue to push that back. The issue is that we have the face of columns there are about 4 feet in, so those would then start to protrude on the exterior of the building at grade. If we could move our front lobby glass storefront back 5 feet, it would be sort of like this little cut portico going into the building, but extending it all the way up the 100 feet of the facade, like he said, would cut into redesign of all the units along, probably from that entrance towards Blair, because we wouldn't want to push that 5 feet back and then that rest of that facade doesn't then align with the design.
So I think we're sympathetic. We're not asking to the extent that staff doesn't think we're doing enough. I mean, I think we're sympathetic to trying to continue to work to mitigate that. That particular way of doing it is really hard. So I guess what we're asking for is they have several items that are recommended for further staff approval at somewhat of a later date. If this could be added to those items, I think we could find a way where we got to something that they would approve of. But that particular way is really hurts the building.
Talk me through, so you're trying to hit some of the planned development stuff through the affordable housing sort of units. Talk me through how many affordable and how you see that.
So part of why at least the give end, and I'm sure the domain end too, got excited about this is the first, the 2 exchanges in aggregate are the first buildings to actually achieve kind of deep level affordability. In this building, 50% AMI for 20% of the units. In Exchange B, we're looking at 40 units at 40% AMI.
How long?
Duration will be at least 55 years. Really, we see it as permanent. The difference with this building versus most affordable housing is that this is done without 9% tax credits, which are incredibly scarce, and there's a limit to the amount you can afford. So this proves a model where you can take a tool that isn't traditionally used for affordable housing and make it work for a deeply skewed AMI. To my knowledge, these are the only projects in the last decade that have successfully been able to do that. And part of the reason we're able to do that is that these are very high-end market units. So we're kind of leveraging the money that they throw off to provide the affordability on the lower end. But yeah, so this building would be, I believe, 58 units of affordable housing at 50% AMI, and those are 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. And then the exchange.
Mixed among them, or are they all 1 bedroom, all studio? What is the?
No, they have to be mixed.
They're proportionate to what the overall building is.
Okay.
And then on Exchange B, you have 40% at 40% AMI, or 40 units at 40% AMI, 40 at 80% AMI, and then the balance we're just unilaterally restricting at 80% rents, even though those won't technically be restricted by income of tenant.
Okay.
Anybody? Anything else? Okay, you can step back and we'll open the public hearing. Is there anyone from the community council that would like to speak? Downtown? Is there anybody who's present who wants to speak on this? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and bring it back to us. You want the staff and,
Yeah, I
Staff
just assume
back?
for, I assume for staff. I
could we
mean,
get staff back, please?
I assume as we're approving this project, their commitment here to their 20% at or below 50% AMI is within the plan development request, and that's what's qualified them from plan development, correct?
I believe that was one of the things.
They've
I
met
think
a
there
few
was 3.
objectives, and it's not,
Yeah.
that's one that they will, because it's what they're presenting, they're not gonna, they can't, not in a position they can come back and say, well, we met some of the other objectives, and we're gonna kind of bail on this one.
I think staff identified that they met C, E, and F, which are housing, sustainability, and master plan implementation.
Right. And they have to continue to meet those going forward if we approve it tonight, all 3.
Yeah, I believe so. That's how they got into that's how they qualify for the plan development process.
So Amy, I'd like to hear your thoughts on their proposal to work with you on some alternative to the proposed condition of 20 feet wide, 5 feet setback.
Yeah, I think staff has been working with them and has been willing to work with them, and we will continue to do that if that condition is delegated to staff. We had to put a very specific condition on it because in our opinion, it as it is, didn't meet the intent of that. And so in order to do that, we went with the 20 feet because that's what's required for the building separation. But yeah, I think if the commission decides that they go with the recommended motion, yeah, we can continue to work with the applicant.
Well, I'm interested to hear your thoughts of what are some ideas that would meet the intent, just to kind of speculate. So I'm trying to gauge my comfort on what could possibly be the end result.
I think even just the recession at the bottom level, I mean, it's really the applicant's, the burden is on the applicant to show that they're meeting that intent, not staff. It's up to us to look at it to ensure that they're meeting the intent. But I think just ensuring that there's some kind of break in the wall plane would be closer to meeting the intent of that design standard.
And would you be okay with that if it doesn't go all the way up the building, or?
I think there's already some break in the upper floors. It's more the lower levels of the building.
And as far as that same 5-foot recess on the 400 south facing wall, was the 5 foot chosen arbitrarily, or was it a reasoning behind that number in particular?
There wasn't necessarily a depth that we thought was, I mean, there isn't a depth as far, otherwise it would just go through the whole building. Part of the 5 feet, I think we picked because that's the required like awning depth, and some of the other features that are required have a 5 foot depth, and so we felt that that would be significant enough to break up the massing of the wall.
Right.
But there isn't any specific thing that says 5 feet.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thoughts, questions? Somebody ready to make a motion?
Well, I'll kind of explain where I'm at right now. I understand staff's explanation of the intent of the 200-foot standard. And I'm really uncomfortable with it because I mean, 200 feet already to me seemed long, and we had this discussion when we changed the, when we created the zone. And 200 just seems very long to me, and I understand the Blair Street, but I would err on breaking that block up more, or, you know, we had talked about at the time creating, even if it is a adjoining building, you create the illusion that it is a completely different building as part of that sort of a way to break that up. Because, I mean, what we've seen on 400 South already are just these massive buildings. And this looks like another one to me. It really doesn't, it's just not broken up enough for me. So that's kind of where I'm sitting right now on that.
Granted, we're not looking at the whole design, but they're saying that if they do that, then they lose apartments, right?
Well, correct. I mean, I would look at other, I mean, I would be willing to let them go taller if that would solve the problem.
Unfortunately, that's not something that you have the purview to do. So
I don't feel like a 5 foot by 20 foot recess makes a big difference in this structure of building. I mean, I'm starting with Weston, where I feel like it's, you know, what we're doing at 4 and South is really awful. Although I feel if this was not an affordable housing development, like what a true affordable housing development, which seems to be trying to kind of meet some of those standards, I would definitely be opposed. I'm seeming more willing to think through what they're doing to 400 South as a result of trying to actually bring in some actual housing and not just affordable at $400,000 condo, you know what I mean, or affordable as a studio. You know, so I don't really know how to weigh that. But I do think, yeah, I mean, it's just the more of these buildings we put up there 300 feet long that have no separation and feel like it's the exact same building, and we just end up with this monstrosity of a street without any sort of feel for why would you ever kind of walk along it, and a sidewalk that's, you know, that's my struggle too.
I think I'm in the same place or close to where you guys are. You know, and I see they're doing some things other buildings don't have to do. They're doing retail just about all the way around. They're trying to do 2 fronts, or more than that, 3 fronts. Yeah, and you know, I feel like they've really made some efforts, so I appreciate that. But a 300-foot facade is so long. And okay, you know, it's not quite 3, but still, it's anything above 2 feels very, very long to me. And to have them not even wanting to put that recess in, I'm having, that's where my heartburn is.
Even if that last 77 feet was just brick or done with a different type of feel, where it would feel, you would think maybe it was a different building when driving past it. You know, just in different material, different colors, different.
So you guys are saying that even if it wasn't recessed, if it was just designed to look like a completely different building, you would feel better about it?
I mean, I think so. I mean, remember back when we were doing this and we looked at that fancy building in Denmark. I don't know, where was it? Remember that?
Oh yeah, there was a term for that. I
Yeah,
forgot what
and
it was called.
and that's exactly what that was.
Yeah.
I mean, it was one giant building, but they were substantially different looking buildings from every 30 feet, or I don't know how long it was, but it was, you know, I think that is, I remember that conversation. I remember that being the intent of that, and I don't know that this really cuts, really adheres to that intent.
I'm also kind of on the same boat. You know, it's a long wall, and we have a lot of big structures, just like it was mentioned before. But I think I agree with the recommendations by staff. I think they thought it they wanted to find the best venue to accommodate both points of view, and I think they did a nice job. What they proposed, I think, is something that would go for me.
I actually like what they've done. I don't have an issue with, and I think we're getting into details of design that are not really within our purview right now, and I think we should make a decision on what's before us and consider their request for the modification.
But it's one of the standards that they're asking for an exception for is going over the 200 feet maximum facade on a street face. So that's exactly one of the standards we are being asked to let go. And what I'm saying is I don't want to let that go.
I also kind of feel like it's a day late because we already have 10 buildings that look like this on 400 South, and to cut out affordable housing over the whole thing isn't worth it to me. But I'm in favor of maybe making it look like two different buildings, but I'm not in favor of cutting out real estate really for people to live in.
Well, and as Matt said too, I'm super sympathetic to the affordable housing, and I agree, and I would be far more firm if not for the affordable housing. But and to speak to your point about this being the first one we're doing, this is the first one I think that is coming under the new standard on 400 South. Is that right, Nick?
Well, it's the first one that's come to the Planning Commission. Most of these buildings don't actually come to the Planning Commission. Right. I think there are some, I will reiterate that the idea behind this development site was that we're essentially have broken up this quadrant of that block into 4 already. It's a very difficult thing to do to build a 4-sided building that addresses all 4 streets. To some degree, the city kind of set this in motion by identifying it as a development site. And, just so you're aware, the city is a partner in the development. So I think it's important to note that, and I don't know how you should take this or not, but, has the city council, as the RDA board, yesterday approved the funding for the project. And I think their direct quote was, how do we make it taller? And we kind of had to tell them, well, they're maxing out the height, and I think the applicant did say they maxed out the height. So I think that there is some level of, the Planning Commission has a direct job to do in this regard, but there is the political support for the project. And I do think that staff's position is correct, that the intent of the 200 feet is to make sure that we're breaking up our blocks and keep the 300 and 400 foot buildings that we were getting on 400 South broken up so that we could still do that. And in this case, we've achieved that goal because we have two streets that go through the block already.
Seems to me also that a lot of these other really long buildings on 400 South, while they might be designed to the standard and so they never came to us, none of them have much engagement with the street. It's more if you live there, you go to the one door on the street that's to get in and out of the building, whereas what's different about this plan is, at least according to their drawings here, is it's all commercial on the bottom floor, so you do have a reason to walk there and interact. There's lots of entrances and exits. It's not just an apartment entrance.
Oh, I absolutely agree. This is far and away better than what has been put on 400 South. Absolutely. I don't disagree with that at all. And I appreciate all of the intent here. What is giving me heartburn is just that is 200 feet. When we had this conversation and I said 200 feet was too long, but that's what we stuck with, and so I feel like 200 feet is what we got to stick with. And I understand breaking up the block. I completely see that and understand that, but I don't know why that stops us from creating a different look and feel in the building. I don't need the recession. I don't need I don't need that. I just would like to break up the look of the building into, so it's not so gigantic.
Maybe kind of a question for the architect. How challenging is it to take that white? I mean, I actually really hate it when the commission gets into this point, so I feel bad. Another me would hit myself. But that white that's in the northeast corner, how hard is it to take that like all the way up?
I mean, so it's just material. I mean, if you want to try to throw a caveat that we look at changing that, let's call it the building we're seeing on this side of that image and the building on the left to different materials, we can definitely look at that, or change the metal panel color, have two different tones. We just prefer more sort of simple, clean aesthetic. But it's definitely possible. The GFRC could go all the way up. It's just something that you're not noticing is that those units on the top actually sort of arc backwards away from 400 South, so it sort of turns the building towards the university in the mountains, while that GFRC stays straight. So if we take that all the way up in that flat plane, we'd have some windows that are probably going to be like 4 or 5 feet back from the street facade.
What I'm saying, I think, and I don't know if Weston, you can speak for yourself, but that part that's in white, if that whole thing looked like it were separate rather than being part of the rest of the building, it would beige. Beige, sure. Sorry, my colors are off. It would. I think that would help feel like you would have two separate. Yeah. Maybe not exactly. I don't know.
There's actually a lot going on within the GFRC part, the beige part. There's the recessed windows.
No, there's a lot going on that's visually interesting.
They all have actually a sort of wood
There's a lot
lattice on it too, so there's a third material in there that you can't see from this image.
What I'm saying is trying to make that eastern third or whatever that 25% is different than the.
We did a lot of studies of that GFRC elevation. At one point they were the same. At one point we had it all the way up, and this is sort of where it landed, feeling kind of more balanced, but.
Well, and that seems to be kind of more in line with the height of the library, right? Just across from it. So it makes sense to be at that height rather than a lot higher.
I mean, I probably don't want to get into like whether you raise that beige part or not, but I was trying to think if you had like, if it would feel like it was a different building, if that whole part of that building was just not matching the other. Anyway, all right.
Again, if we're able to work with it on the staff level, we can have the architect quickly iterate, different ideas.
I think I would probably be open, it's kind of hearing the other commissioners speak to this and not feeling like I'm getting a lot of support or wavering support. I think I would be open to, I would possibly be open to allowing staff to rectify this. And if it's not the recess, then maybe it is a solution that something like, I mean, I don't think, to your point of not getting into the weeds, I don't care. But what I do care about is that it breaks up the visual, the excess of 200 feet. And however that happens, I guess I'm not going to get into the weeds on that. And if that's something that staff feels comfortable dealing with, I don't know, is that too big of an ask? Especially if this recess is not going to work. If something else would work, is that something that you'd feel comfortable doing?
Yeah, I think staff's willing to work with, the applicant, and we'll continue to work with them to ensure they meet the intent of that.
That retail space is 86 feet long, but that eastern 86 feet on 400 South that look visually different from the remaining 200 feet on the building, or was it 198 feet or whatever, 96? Yeah.
I mean, it could be a simple thing too. GFRC, we're currently looking at, 8 different samples that vary from texture to color, but that's another thing. Simple move we can make is textures too.
And you've made them feel like this is one building, but I think that's our problem. Sure. Like we want it to feel like two.
I mean, just break it up is the
I can try to make a motion, unless Weston wants to.
Well, are you gonna make one that I'm happy with?
You go ahead, Weston.
Now,
You get
boys.
into it.
You go for it. You got the microphone.
For staff, what was the other condition you wanted listed?
We were asking details related to the loading and service areas be delegated to staff.
Okay. So based on the findings listed in the staff report, information presented, and the input received during the public hearing, I move that the Planning Commission approve the conditional building and site design review request, PLN PCM 2018-000470, for modifications of the specified design standards and a plan development request for 5 additional building height, PLN SUB 2018-00434, with the conditions listed in the staff report, with the exception of,
I think it's number 1.
yeah, with the exception of number 1, and, which is one you were concerned about, right? And adding that staff is able to work with the applicant on the waste removal along Blair,
Loading.
loading and unloading along Blair Street, is that right? Sorry.
Yeah, it'll just be just the loading and access areas. I don't think they'll be off of Blair Street.
Okay, so working with the staff to address loading and unloading and access to the building, and also with approval by staff that the northeastern corner of the 86, with roughly 80 feet or more, look visually different than the remaining portion of the building, all the way to the top of the building. They remove all the way to the top.
Just a clarification. So basically, no recess, just a straight wall throughout.
They have a 3-foot recess now. They're saying that going to 5 feet causes other issues with the design, the layout of the site. I don't think that having a 5-foot recess in a building meets the, I mean, for those of us who are here when we went past this ordinance, I don't think the 5-foot recess really meets what we were trying to do with breaking up the building facades. I think the whole point is ending this like massive series of one building that's on each block face for the entire block's length of Fourth South. And so I don't think a 5-foot depth, because it's more about visual from either the other side of the street or driving down the street or riding tracks down the street, is going to be noticed. But I do think if you visually change the material on the northeastern corner and the color and the texture and that you can do a lot to make that northeastern kind of 86 feet look different than the remaining 200 feet.
Yes.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I will second that, as long as we all agree that that's a good motion. Is that?
Well, there's one thing missing from the motion, and that's the modification of the specified design standards in 21A .37.
Didn't we get it?
No, you jumped right to the plan development
That's
request.
specified design standards. I just didn't list the order.
Yeah.
Specified design standards and site standards.
So I'm more comfortable delegating to staff to work out how to break out that up without being so literal of it has to be on this northeast corner and it has to go all the way up to the top and it has to be different color, different material.
I
I
agree.
think there may be other ways that I'm not an architect, so I don't feel comfortable being that literal with how to break it up, but that I do feel comfortable delegating to staff to work with the applicant to meet the intent of the standard. And it may not be that corner because we may want to break it up in the middle. It may just, I just don't want to be that specific on
Are
this
you
one.
making a substitute motion?
I was just articulating my
Okay.
reticence to support that particular part of the motion.
Do you want to modify your motion?
I mean, the reason I think we need to give some direction is because, well, at least for me, I think I have a slightly different read on the intent than the staff does, because the staff thinks that the 5-foot recess meets that standard, and I disagree. And so I think we need to, if we want to, we can drop it some of the direction, which is fine. But we still, I think, need to give some direction to the staff and the applicant about what that may mean if we disagree with the staff's report. If you agree with the staff's report, that the staff has offered a recommendation for how to meet that standard.
You see, I just think there are other alternatives that might end up being better. And I don't want to lock it in to that specific solution.
I think our intention is to break up the building using
Yeah, but
materials.
maybe the northeast corner isn't the
I
best
agree with
place to
you.
do that.
And I'm saying, if we can be, I still think if we let staff know our intention is to break up the building using materials, we're not saying it has to be a certain amount or certain, that it has to go to the full length of the building. If they can come up with, they know our intention is to break up the building, I think we're on the same page.
I would be more supportive of that.
What,
But the wording was very specific of go all the way to the top in the northeast corner. And,
Right.
and that's where I'm,
6 feet.
I want a little bit more flexibility for staff and the applicant to maybe come up with something that may be better. I don't know, that might be the solution, but I think there's possible other ways to go about it.
well, I appreciate what Matt said, because I know we are often asked for more direction and think that is generally more helpful, because we don't want to leave you hanging with vague terms. But what if we, would it make it too vague if we said something like, leave it up to staff to come up with that articulation, but it would need to be to the extent similar to what Matt laid out? Is that too vague? So it's not just a recess. So we're just saying, yeah, a large section of this building is going to have to change its material substantially.
Yeah, I don't know that changing the
Okay, well
materials
then-
is the solution either. I think they already have multiple materials. And so adding in, like, is this going to be like a menagerie of materials? And I don't know if that's the way to go. But they're not presenting a blank wall right now. So I just think there might be other options, and I don't know them. I just don't want to lock them in. And I get it. It's probably one of the reasons I don't always make motions is because I can't get specific enough for staff. So I don't know. I don't know.
Do you want it to come back to us? Is that what you're suggesting?
That wasn't in my mind.
Because then what specifically would you see as an alternative to that?
I think expressing the intent that Matt did, but not. So the intent is to break this up. We want it to feel like it's different buildings, and to direct staff to work with the applicant to achieve that, to make sure that this 277-foot building is interesting and visually broken up in a way to enhance like the pedestrian experience.
So I have a question, just as a what if. We're delegating this to staff, and we're talking about being less specific than Matt's original motion. But so what if they just decide, well, we're going to make that back end red and call it good? Is that sufficient for you? Because right now, even when I look at the plans, I can count kind of 4 different shapes in there. So it comes down to kind of a perspective thing where I see 4 buildings there. Matt sees one building, and if they colored something differently, that would fulfill the terms of what you're proposing, possibly, if staff is cool with that. So I guess the question is, how important is it to be super specific, like Matt's
I think
being?
that's a great question. I think there are projects where I feel like there are very specific things that need to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been in the position where I've thought A, B, C needs to happen to this. This one just, yeah, you're right. It already feels like it's meeting some of those objectives, but it is subjective to how we're viewing it. And I get a feeling that the applicant is very willing to, I think sometimes if the applicant seems like this is exactly how it needs to be, then I feel sometimes we need to give more specific direction. I'm like, no, it needs to be this way. Whereas this, the applicant seems to be very open to like, how do we work this out so that it still meets the objectives of the number of apartments, the number of parking stalls, et cetera, but then also gets the intent of breaking this up.
So Matt, do you have a modification?
I'm willing to, I kind of want to, that last condition is just that the final, that the expanse that is greater than 200 feet looks substantively different with different materials than the remaining 200. And that's, I mean, and this I think is going to lose, but I'm happy to call the question and let's vote.
Okay, okay.
Well, I think you're being more general there now, that you're just saying that one of these sides needs to be different than the other one, and leaving it up to them.
Sure.
Is that, I mean,
I'd
that's
like to call
what
the
I'm
question.
hearing. You're
Let's vote.
specifically saying that that eastern portion is the portion to focus on, but they could do whatever they want. They could do either side.
Sure. That there cannot be a span longer than 77 or 200 feet that has the same material. Call the question.
Okay.
Well, then their design right now kind of meets that, right? Because they have like a white part and then a blue part and then a white part and a blue part, and so they don't have 200 feet.
Let's call the question, please.
Is
Call
that
the
an
question.
amendment to the motion?
No.
Okay, you're just clarifying.
Clarify.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, everybody understands what we're voting on, right? All good? Okay. Start with Amy,
Yes.
Carolyn,
Yes.
Matt,
Yes.
Weston,
Yes.
Sarah,
Yep.
Adrian,
Yes.
Clark,
Yes.
Andreas.
I will vote no.
The motion passes. The motion passes. Thanks, Amy.
Thank you.
You guys,
Can
good
I-
luck.
Can I just ask for a clarifying point? All of you understood what you were voting on, but I don't quite. So initially, you had said that it needs to go all the way to the top. Is that still a thing, or is that just open-ended?
Different
Up to
material.
staff?
Different material.
Okay,
200 feet. You can't have more than 200 linear feet of the same material
because,
across the bottom of the across the bottom. That's my intent.
okay, because I think, like Clark said, it might already meet that requirement.
I don't
So-
see how you have the blue on the top run all the way across. So linear is the way the street kind of flows.
Okay, so, well, I was thinking you were talking about that break in the top,
No,
so.
that whole
okay,
no. So the way the
something there needs
street,
to
the
be
way
broken.
as it flows along the street.
Okay, thanks.
Are we okay there? Because I actually think that confused me more than, because the intent is different than what your wording in your motion was. Your wording said all the way up and did some other things in the motion. So if, well,
Should we clarify?
you vote, I think the commission voted to approve the original motion. And to me, when we go to review their final plans, we're gonna be looking for that to go all the way up to the top. So if that's what everybody's clear on, then, okay. All right.
So then I wasn't clear on that either, because I thought we had discussed this and that he had revised kind of what he was saying about, it didn't matter if it went all the way up or not. But I don't think we went through a formal substitute motion either.
We did not. That's why the
Oh,
original
he
motion
just said he was
stands in
gonna
place.
clarify it.
Oh, yeah, I thought he had reworded that to not, to say that it wasn't dictating it had to go all the way to the top.
I think when we
When he
asked,
just basically, he
we asked if
reworded
that
his
was a
intent.
modification to the original motion, and I believe the answer was no.
No, I thought he said, is
Said
there
it
an
was a
amendment?
clarification.
I thought Paul asked if there was an amendment to the motion.
Okay, so to recall the previous motion, you make a motion to reconsider, made by the commissioner.
Do we have a motion to reconsider?
I'll make a motion to reconsider.
And a second?
A second.
Okay. Amy?
Yes.
Carolyn?
Yes.
Matt?
No.
Weston?
No.
Sarah?
I'm sorry, I don't know what we're voting on.
Motion to
To-
motion for me to
Reconsider.
redo the motion.
Oh,
We're recalling.
no.
Adrian?
Yes.
Clark?
Yes.
Andreas?
No.
This is weird that the chair is going to break a tie on a motion to reconsider, but it's all yours.
I'm going to say yes. I think we should clarify that.
So then do we offer a substitute motion now, or do we offer just a new motion?
A new motion.
Madam
New
Chair, I'd like
motion.
to make a motion. Back up. All right, based on the findings listed in the staff report, the information presented, and the input received during the public hearing, I move that the Planning Commission approve the conditional building and site design review request, PLN PCM 2018-000470, and the modification of specified design standards and the plan development request for the 5 feet of additional building height, PLN SUB 2018-00434, with the conditions listed in the staff report with the exception of number 1. Also adding the condition that the staff work with the applicant to approve loading zones and areas, and adding the condition that there should be no more than 200 linear feet along the street, not along the building, but 200 linear street feet, not building feet, can be the same materials. And that that anything over 200 feet must look substantively different with different materials, designs, and colors than the, or colors than the other 200 feet.
I'll second that.
Okay, is everybody clear on what the motion is? Amy?
Yes.
Carolyn?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes?
Weston?
Yes.
Sarah?
Yes.
Adrian?
Yes.
Clark?
Just a point of clarification before I vote. I heard you say that no material can go longer than 200 feet.
On a street linear, not along the building. So the gap that's there, so you have blue, gap, blue, that would not qualify. You would need to have blue gap red, blue gap brick, blue gap something else, but it needs to be as the street.
But you're saying a material can go 200 feet in length.
Yes, our code permits 200 feet in length.
Okay. I'm going to vote no.
And Andres?
I'll vote yes.
The motion passes. Is it clear for you?
There, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I want to say real fast on that. I think I'm really excited about this because I think it's an opportunity to really drive the point home about the expectation of the 200 feet on 400 South. I think you have such an opportunity to really make a really centerpiece of a building that utilizes that code to the advantage. So thank you for being willing to go through that with us, and thanks for your work.
All right, item 2 tonight's the D2 Design Standard Zoning Text Amendment. Come on up, John.
All right, well, thanks for having me back. This will be a bit repetitive because we have heard this before, but I do know there's at least one commissioner who has not heard this before. So we're We're here to talk about the design standards for the D2 zone, the Downtown Support District. If you look at the map on the screen, the D2 areas are in pink. So you'll see they surround the west and southern ends of downtown. Through them, you'll find a lot of highly trafficked streets. There are a lot of visible sites. And most of the gateways to downtown, or at least certainly the busiest ones, would be 4th South, 5th South, 6th South, West Temple, Main, and State, are all zoned as D2. There is some growth pressure in this neighborhood, and we're seeing that all over the city, especially with growth moving north from the Central 9th neighborhood and then things moving south from the Central Business District. Currently, there are no development standards other than a height standard in this district. So, as I mentioned earlier, you could build a 60-foot windowless metal building surrounded by parking anywhere in the zone, and that would be permitted. You would never come to see you guys. It would just pull a permit. I think it's important to remember that this project is implementing the Downtown Master Plan, which calls for improved design standards in all of our downtown districts. This one became a priority once the Sears site became available, and we realized it's a prime lot for redevelopment and could really have a huge impact in the South Downtown area and its future growth. That was also looked at in other plans, such as Life on State, that the city's been participating in. I should mention that also it's being eyed very heavily by developers, and so you'll probably see something in the near future. The purpose of the text amendment is to create improved gateways into downtown, activate street frontages and pedestrian spaces, minimize impacts to low-density residential neighborhoods, require the use of durable materials, and then preserve existing well-established land uses. These standards that we came up with here are based on best planning practices in general, as well as design standards we've implemented in other zones, such as the TSA zone and the Sugar House Business District, and felt that we've implemented successfully. In our last discussion, it was my fault, I didn't clarify. The design standards include a table which tells you which design standards apply in which zoning district. However, I failed to mention that the design standards chapter that accompanies it at the very beginning is definitions for each of these standards and defines what those standards are. So, for example, Commissioner Barry asked, when we talked about 40% glass, well, could that be at 9 feet up and stretch over? And so, no, we couldn't. If we look at the definition, those, and I did provide them, they should be in your packet this time, that it's 40% glass and it has to be between 3 and 8 feet from the ground. So to ensure that you are getting that active ground front. So that was something that was missing from our original briefing, so I apologize for that. So just to go through these standards, these ones, I just want to start off again looking at ground floor design standards. As you all well know, the ground floor, as in your last discussion, has a huge impact on how the public interacts with the structure and the ability to create an interesting urban street and environment where people actually want to be. So the minimum amount of ground floor glass is 40%, or these are all proposed, obviously. Entrances at every 50 feet along all street frontages, requiring active ground floor uses on all street frontages, with some busier streets such as State Street, Main Street, 8th and 9th South, would require specific ground floor uses such as retail, restaurants, bars, which would further activate these busier corridors. We realize that not all retail is not going to work on every street in every neighborhood, and so quieter streets, those that are less busy, would still require a ground floor use, but something like office or residential would work. In no time could it ever be parking. Mid-block walkways would be required anywhere that is identified in an adopted master plan. Requesting the allowance of projector blade signs, which actually came from our public engagement in the community. It was something that we were asked from business owners who would like to work to do that. These are signs that are hung perpendicular from the street, so currently not permitted, but they're definitely very pedestrian oriented as they're kind of focused right above and beyond the sidewalk. And lastly, of course, the buildings would be set at the street with no parking available between the building and the sidewalk. Something we did mention is it's not a requirement to be right at the street. You do have the ability to move it back 10 feet, but you would have to activate that space with like outdoor dining or something like that. It could never be, like I said, parking or something empty. So if we look at, obviously all these standards will affect the ground floor as well, but this is kind of talking about a building more holistically. And so looking at scale and massing and what the impacts on the street are, as well as on neighboring property owners. The first would be limiting the length of a building to 200 feet, which you guys are all obviously very aware of that. requiring articulation of the facade of the structure, so meaning those no blank walls over 15 feet, requiring a minimum amount of durable exterior building materials such as brick, stone, rock, or other materials. I should mention the design standards do allow the planning director to approve other materials that aren't listed if it can be shown that they are durable and well built, knowing that we certainly cannot predict all building materials that do or will exist. For the very first time in Salt Lake City, there'll be a minimum amount of upper floor glass of 25%. And all mechanical equipment service areas, loading docks would need to be screened. And then there's a whole section on parking garage that have very specific standards to any standalone parking garage, something located behind the building, not necessarily something that's integrated into the structure itself. So this was just a response to our briefing and our last conversation. I just wanted to go through what the changes that were made and how it kind of reacted to those statements that you made. First, the affordable housing requirement was increased to 40%. If you remember, originally, the original proposal was that any building that included 30% or more of affordable housing could request additional height without going through the conditional building and site design process. So it would become just an administrative approval. I know there was a little bit of heartburn and some concern with that, and so we took that back. I discussed it with the housing division, really to look at what kind of additional zoning tools, what other opportunities do we have, what can we do to help increase the number of affordable housing units in the city, which we know that we desperately need right now. So I discussed about perhaps raising that from 30 to 40% to qualify, and that's where we got the number 40%. Other than that, we really looked and searched hard, and what other tools do we have? The only tool in the zoning ordinance right now is there's a reduction in parking, which is certainly helpful, but it isn't making a substantial, it's been in there since 1995, so I don't know if it's made a really substantial change in what we're doing here. Really, when it came down to the housing division, said at the moment, their best tool is loan programs, and so they would like to see this move forward if the Planning Commission felt comfortable. You will see additional tools and things coming forward as they're working to implement the housing plan.
Can I ask a quick question?
You may.
How are you defining affordable housing?
So we would be using the housing division's numbers, which is, I think it's below 60% AMI.
So that's the
area median income, yeah.
right, but 80% wouldn't qualify, or if you did some mix, would ended up with an average.
I think in just a conversation I had with them, and this is that the average, that it would have to be 60% or below. The 80% would not necessarily qualify in their eyes.
Unless they had 40% and below for some.
Right, and once at 40%, you could of course change that, but you wouldn't be qualified if you had just at 80%
Okay.
AMI. Secondly, the commission discussed entries on the street. There was the original proposal was just to have an entrance on each street frontage. That there was a little bit concern if you had a 200-foot long building facade length that one door may not be sufficient. So looked at other zones and looked at some that we've done in the past, and so we increased that to one for each 50 feet along the street frontage. And the last one, and I think this is probably where we had the biggest discussion, was about auto sales facilities. And I did research that, and I can go through that a little bit with you. I just wanted to just remind you that one unique portion of the proposal is that we haven't included standards that specifically address auto sales lots. And as you've been in this neighborhood and driven through, you'll see some of the city's largest auto sales lots are in the D2 zone along State Street and West Temple. It's a pretty unique land use with unique design requirements. They're large and are unlikely to go away in the foreseeable future. It is a permitted use in the zone, and through this process, we aren't looking to identify what uses are appropriate, just design standards for the structures themselves. So in a compromise, the following standards had been included, and I'll tell you right now, this is something that the proposal remains the same on this, but one, that all major buildings, all sales display buildings, things where people are actually working, storing vehicles, or displaying vehicles, must comply with proposed design standards, having that against the street and having the glass requirements, everything. Auxiliary buildings such as car washes or auto repair facilities would not necessarily have to comply with proposed design standards. Perimeter landscaping required anywhere along the street frontage where there's not a building. They would need to landscape that area. And lastly, that just staying in multiple buildings are allowed on a lot. So just go through, I did do some research. In fact, I researched lots of West Coast cities. I focused a lot of time on Seattle, Portland, LA, and Denver. And it's probably not going to shock you, it is not common to find very large auto dealers very close to the central business district. They're almost always found in the suburbs surrounding these larger cities. Every city had small, used kind of car type facilities, but not the national name brands that we're all familiar with seeing. The one exception was that I looked at, Los Angeles had a few. They were mostly contained in parking structures. So I did go through that zoning ordinance to try to find, and I went through these other zoning ordinances to find out, are they not there because they've been zoned out of that, or is it something else? And the more research I did, I really think it's fiscally based. The reason that it's in a parking structure there or doesn't exist there is because it takes up such a large piece of property. The price of land in these cities has just been high enough that it didn't make either fiscal sense to remain there or move outwards or to build in a parking structure. I think Salt Lake City will probably reach that at some point in the future, but I think we can see as of right now, I don't know that we have reached that point to make it economically feasible. So staff continues to believe the proposed standards for auto sales facilities does offer these uses, these permitted uses that already are here, some flexibility, but doesn't really deviate significantly from the goals of the proposals, as most of the major structures would still be built along the street. Just to reiterate, we conducted a lot of public engagement, more than we have in a lot of these types of projects. I met stakeholders, business owners, the Business Advisory Board, the Main Street America Group, the Ballpark Community Council, the Planning Division Open House. There has generally been a lot of support for the project as a whole. However, as I mentioned earlier at the briefing at the open house, there were comments directed to the auto sales lots and whether or not they should have any sort of waivers or modifications specifically for them. And the comments are in your packet as well. Some really were based on the fact they just didn't want car dealerships in that neighborhood as well. Since the briefing, I've spoke again with a few more residents and business owners. We did send notices to all D2 zoned properties in the city. All expressed support or just requesting additional information. So up to this point, besides these auto sales facilities, there haven't been any negative comments received. So at this time, staff is recommending that the Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation to the City Council for this zoning text amendment. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We'll open the public hearing on this. Does anyone here wish to speak on this topic? Anyone? Going once, twice? Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing and bring it back up to the commission.
Yeah, I actually think Johnny did a really great job in incorporating a lot of the feedback you had in the working session. And I like the clarification that we're not talking about zoning. So the fact that it's a permitted use to have a car dealership is not on the table. And I also agree with the analysis you gave in your report that I think at some point just the value of the land we'll see those things change. So I'm comfortable with it, and if there's no other comments, I'd be willing to make a motion.
Go for it.
All right, based on the information presented and the input received during the public hearing, I move that the Planning Commission recommend that the City Council approve the D2 Downtown Support Design Standard Text Amendment Petition PLN-PCM 2018-00118.
I'll second.
Okay, motion by Amy, second by Carolyn. Any discussion? Okay, we'll vote. Andres,
I'll vote yes.
Clark,
Yes.
Adrian,
Yes.
Sarah,
Yes.
Weston,
Thanks for all your work and extra research on that, John. I really appreciate it. And I'll vote yes.
Matt,
Yes.
Carolyn,
Agree.
and Amy.
Yes.
The motion passes.
A little easier.
Okay, we have our item on the Jefferson Walkway Plan Development Major
All
Modification.
right, thank you. This is a request for a modification to locate an accessory structure and mechanical equipment in what is the front yard of the property at 830 Jefferson Street. The proposed accessory building would encroach up to 5 feet into the existing front yard. The mechanical equipment would be located to the side of that structure. Our recommendation is that the request be denied because we don't believe that it's in substantial conformity with the approved development plan, which is the standard listed in the plan development ordinance. Just to orient you to the location, this is in the Central 9th neighborhood. That might not be all that easy to see, so we'll move on. It's in an FBUN1 zone. The front yard setback in this zone, the wording in the ordinance is a little bit strange because it says that it's the average of the block face where applicable, otherwise a minimum of, I believe, 10 feet and a maximum of 20. However, the ordinance doesn't clarify what where applicable means. Our zoning administrator has determined that that's basically, where applicable means when there's other buildings on the block face. But the ordinance doesn't clarify that. The 830 Jefferson property, it's unclear exactly where the property line is. The distance provided by the applicant is 16 to 17 feet. That's measured, I believe they can clarify this, but I think it's from the edge of what is their fence to their building. The fence is basically located at the edge of the sidewalk. The block face average, according to the original plan development, is 19 feet. And that's, I think, labeled on the original site plan, but apparently there's some confusion as to how that was calculated at this point in time. And so we're just going off of what the other buildings are on there, and we'll get to that in a little bit. In fact, right now. So this is an aerial that shows the blue line represents the location of the front facade in relationship to other structures on the property. This is the north half of the block. The subject property is in the reddish circle. And so you can see there are some structures that do encroach further and closer to the street than the subject property does on the north. And similar situation on the south. The property on the corner of the south, on 900 South and Jefferson is a vacant piece of property, but you can see, and in a different zoning district, but you can kind of see how that lines. Now, just one note, when we're dealing with aerials and when we put lines that are big enough for the eye to see, it does create some, that blue line would have some thickness. It's an unknown thickness because this is a drawing program that does this, but it is aligned, at least with what the aerial shows, has the edge of the structure of the subject property. So it's intended only to show that there are other structures on the block face that are closer to the property or to the property line than the subject property. I think it's also important to note that this property was developed with a 0 rear yard setback. So this property has no options for accessory structures located in the rear yard. One of the unique things about the plan development ordinance that was in existence at the time this was approved in the ordinance that we would apply when we're looking at this is that it did 3 or 4 things that may take a little bit of explaining. One, and all plan developments allow minor modifications, and they allow the planning director to approve minor modifications for the location of accessory structures and to adjust the distance between any building and the boundary of a development site. It doesn't say property line, but it says the boundary of a development site, which, one, we think is somewhat problematic because that essentially gives the planning director the ability to modify building setbacks, which we think is erroneous, but the ordinance is what it is. There is a section in that same minor modification or statement in that same minor modification section that says that any minor modification can't violate some other section of this code. However, the plan development ordinance at the time had additional conflicting language that says that the approved development plan regulates the you use the approved development plan to determine future changes to the site versus any other regulation of the zoning ordinance. And so unless the planning commission, when they approved a plan development, specifically put a condition on it dealing with either the limitations of the development plan or a location, in this case, of an accessory structure, then we have to use the development plan, and we believe that's why the plan development ordinance at the time gave the planning director the ability to make some modifications. Just so you know, since then we have taken out that language about the plan development trumping everything in the zoning ordinance after approval. Now it says only those things that are specifically modified through the plan development are subject, but that's not applicable in this case. So this is the proposal. Bigger site plan on the left, and then it's been zoomed in, so hopefully you can kind of see. The dimensions are a little hard to read, but you have this in your packet. It's an 8x8 structure, 8x8, and then a 2-foot alcove, something. So the eastern wall, the eastern and western walls of the structure are, I believe, 10 feet 4 inches or something like that, and then the northern and southern elevations are 8 feet, and it's 7 feet 6 inches, I think, in height. And you can kind of see that location.
Nick, can I stop you there real quick? Going back to that plan, who submitted that plan?
This is the applicant, the current property owner, drew on the proposed structure, but it's actually the site plan that was approved as part of the plan development. So that's where the hand-drawn items are from the applicant, but the kind of computer-drawn items are from the actual or snippets from the plan development site plan.
Okay, and then my follow-up question to that is related to the letter that you sent on June 28, 2018, where you approved an 8x8x8 structure. And number 4, you said the approval is limited to what is described on the attached plans. Is that the plan that you're talking about?
No, I have that. This is something that the applicant submitted after construction started, and we started to get some.
This is something you saw after this letter.
This is after the letter.
So I just wanted to understand what was submitted, what was the referenced plan that you attached.
Okay. We'll get that, and I think it is in one of the attachments in your report. These are the elevations with the dimensions provided by the applicant. So 10 foot 8 inches, and then 7.6 down to 7.4. I think that's what that says. And then some pictures of the construction that's in progress, and also a picture of the location of the mechanical equipment that was relocated. Let's see if this actually moves forward here.
What the white unit is the mechanical?
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
There we go. So this is actually the document that was part of that approved letter. We highlighted 2 areas of this because we believe that there was some incorrect information provided on the site plan, and we wanted to kind of highlight these. The first thing is the 7-foot dimension that's located towards the bottom of the image, and one, it's not drawn to scale, and so when things aren't drawn to scale, we have to take the literal label that's on the document. And so when we read this, we did read it. You can kind of see in that there's a vertically aligned statement that says, I think, 5 feet door. We took that 7 foot from that similarly dashed line and applied it out to where the vertical dashed line runs, which is in line with the front wall of the house. Because the depth of that, at least on this drawing, isn't clear. We looked at the 1 foot separation between the structure and that wall, and that's partly how we made the determination that alcove was a depth of 6 feet. We now know that that's a depth of 4 feet and some inches. And so the other part of that is at the top, there's the label 8 that was added after the applicant proposed to change the dimensions from 6 by 8 to 8 by 8. And you know, the applicant can explain their rationale as well on this, but we read that as a 6 that's on that line and an 8, and because how we read the 6 being inverted in an opposite direction from the 8, we felt like that added some more clarity to what we interpreted the depth of that to be, and that's why we approved that minor modification and allowed it to actually encroach into the front yard, with the caveat that it mostly be in that alcove, because we thought that one, with a 0 setback, we were trying to find some reasonable solution, and because there were other buildings that encroached closer to the sidewalk than the subject property, we determined that it was a minor modification we could prove based on that information. We now know that information, whether it's how we interpret it or how it was provided, was incorrect. We think it's how it was provided, and that's kind of where we landed with that. So if you have questions, I'm glad to answer them. Otherwise, I think it's better for you to hear more from the applicant before I go any further. So
I also want you to clarify for everyone that the original, how I read the report, was that the original application for this minor modification showed no utilities, right?
Yeah, there's a statement on the original plans that were attached to that letter that says utilities relocated. Now, in the world of planning and how we interpret things, we have to be very literal in how things are written. And so when we see that on a plan, we interpret it to mean it's already happened, that something has already taken place, and that there would be no other additional utilities to be relocated. Typically, what is written on a plan when somebody is going to be relocating utilities is, we'll say utilities to be relocated or to be moved, in which case that's a signal to us to try to figure out, one, are you moving them into a legal location? And it's unfortunate sometimes that people who don't go through planning processes for a living or have done it before, it's unrealistic to really expect them to be nuanced enough to know that. But legally, that's how we have to look at things, is that we have to take it very literal as it's written and how it is proposed on paper, and that's what we did.
When you approved this minor modification, you were basically just approving, you don't look at what the use is, you just
No, we were simply looking at a location of an accessory building. There was no other indication for us to look at anything else. So if there had been indication that there were utilities, that they were going to be relocating that mechanical equipment, it would have been a red flag for us. And we could have identified that as, hey, that's something else that you need to consider. And if you're going to be moving it, it also requires the necessary permits. So that way we know. But because that information wasn't provided to us, we didn't go down that path.
And so, for this, so Garth Hare was the original applicant.
Correct.
Brought this forward. He was the guy that did plan development. And Brody is
the current property owner of 830.
He bought the unit from Garth.
I believe that's correct.
And he's looking at the plan development was approved to figure out what he can do and what he can't do.
Yep.
So where were the utilities originally placed then?
I don't know that I actually have a picture of the structure in here, but
I think it's in the staff report.
Might be.
They were in a screened box right behind.
Yeah,
what
they were.
What that box is right there. Yeah.
Yeah. So they were that kind of grayish wall that you see, they were basically right in front of that. So they were in between where this building under construction is sitting and the wall of the house. So they're in that little, what is now a gap, but.
Page 17.
They're still facing the same side of the house, right? They're still exposed to the same street. They just now don't have
The
screened box around them.
Well, the difference is that they were in the buildable area before,
Okay.
and that's allowed. Now they're outside of the buildable area, and the ordinance doesn't allow that.
Step back and we'll bring the applicant up. So you have about 10 minutes.
Cool, great. Hello, commissioners. Hello, Nick. I understand this is a volunteer commission. I want to thank you guys for your service, first of all, to our city, and I also understand it's a Wednesday evening, so in light of that, I'll be brief. I just thought I would address those questions that were just asked right off the bat, if that would be helpful. The utilities were originally turned at a 90-degree angle and placed behind where the shed is right now. There's a cedar wall, and the utilities were broadside facing the street, a 4-foot box. The cage that you're referring to that's now protecting them, Commissioner Redinger, is still there. It's been modified to fit over the utilities as is right now. So that still exists, except instead of being a 4-foot kind of eyesore, it's now like an 8-inch wide eyesore. That's kind of how I see it. My name is Brody Levin. I'm the owner now. I bought this property in November. In 2006, I picked up my life and moved to Salt Lake City on my own to go to school. I didn't know anyone here. And little did I know that 12 and a half years later, I'd be in here on a Wednesday evening. I am now a local business owner. I'm a community activist. And I think, like most people in this room, I have invested interest in maintaining the vitality of the city. Jefferson Walkway, what I was told is that it was designed to discourage people from the need to drive and encourage a vibrant sense of community, not only on Jefferson Walkway, but in like the healthy neighborhood that we already have, which is Central 9th. I bought a house. I sold my car. I tried to fit into this mold of who they said should be living here. I added more solar panels to the house. As soon as I moved in, my house is now net positive as opposed to net zero. So I'm adding renewable energy to the grid for more than just myself because I'm powering more than my house. To be efficient, I'd like to systematically address what I've been told informs your decision-making process on this major modification. I also want to respond to any questions that you have. I've got nothing to hide. I'm totally transparent about this, as I have been the whole time. So please feel free to interrupt. As part of this PUD that I know plenty of people, maybe including yourselves, worked long and hard to realize, I have a vested interest in maintaining the intent of not only Jefferson Walkway, but of the Central 9th neighborhood. And my proposal today, and this is my first time doing anything like this, as you can tell by my artistic drawings, is beyond a measure of reasonable doubt in conformity with the intent of the approved development plan that I have moved to Central 9th to be a part of. I didn't move here to change the intent, and I have no desire to do that. I moved there to join it. Along with the letter that you've each received from me, please allow me to categorically address each part of the PUD's intent and explain how my shed is congruent to those intents. This is a verbatim intent from the plan for the PUD to create a pedestrian corridor from Jefferson to 2nd West, which will provide access to the track station located on the block. Okay, check. Shed doesn't impede with that at all. In keeping with the idea of a more public space, the zoning will be utilized in a way that maximizes the goal of the zoning code. Check. Zoning code is not interrupted. And helps elevate the overall character of the neighborhood through the use of contemporary design and housing that addresses both Jefferson and 2nd West, check, and the proposed public sidewalk, or excuse me, proposed public walkway, check. This is zoning district FBUN1. It's intended for verbatim, small structures focused on form of development and building orientations. It emphasizes built environments over land use, which works well because I don't have much land to use. My shed is completely in harmony with both this zoning district intent as well as the Jefferson Parkway PUD. Part of the PUD was the zero setback layout. And that was designed for three things. That was designed to improve quantity, quality, and privacy of outdoor space. Those three elements, my shed impedes on the first one. It decreases the amount of quantity of my outdoor space on Jefferson. It vastly increases the other two, being quality and privacy. Because as the homeowner, I know that the privacy has really been hindered by the lack, the quality has really been hindered by the lack of privacy, and this shed is also going to attest to that. That's just kind of a side benefit of this. We've had theft on our property, even fully fenced in. We've had unwelcome folks multiple times, including people who will just open the gate on our fence, walk down our walkway, open the door to our house, and walk into our house while we're in it. And that's happened multiple times. And I think adding the shed will help add that sense of security because I'll no longer have things in my yard. I'll be able to store them in the shed, and I'll be able to hopefully feel safer on my own property. Now we're talking about Jefferson Walkway itself because that's a big part of this PUD. Although I don't benefit from Jefferson Walkway any more than any of you do, I don't have access to it, I do pay into an HOA that helps to maintain the walkway. Plus on top of that, I shovel snow, I garden, I pick up litter, I pick up leaves, I do the things that any member of our community does to beautify where we live. And on top of that, like I said, I pay to maintain it. And yet I don't have a place to even store these tools that I use to maintain it because, again, I don't have a backyard. I only have this front yard. The HOA already approved the plans of my shed, which were totally accurate, contrary to what one of the complaints you read may have said. The plans were 100% accurate, they were also the plans that the builder got, as were the plans that Nick got. There's only 5 other members of the HOA. None of them can even see this from their property. If you're walking down Jefferson Walkway, you can't see it till you're right in front of it because I'm the end unit and this is on the east side of my house. So like until you're on the last 20 feet of Jefferson Walkway, you don't even know this is here. It has nothing to do with the walkway. The HOA approved it and no one has approached me about it. No one's asked me anything about it and I was in contact with all of them throughout the whole process. Everyone else on the walkway has some sort of protected storage and outdoor space, primarily the 4 central houses. They have outdoor privacy, they have large gated areas, they can do whatever they want on back of them. I'm just looking for that equality, really. And in order to get that, every design element of this shed has been designed to be beautiful, to fit in with the contemporary modern look and while maintaining the look of Jefferson Street. It is designed to appear more as an addition to the house than it is an accessory structure. It has identical siding, so again, behind the shed there, you can see in the bottom left picture there's cedar horizontally. I've already purchased enough cedar to wrap that entire shed in. The idea is that when you're looking at it from the street, you see it as the house appeared before. The length of that wall is the same as the length of the cedar behind the shed. If you're looking at it in 2D from the street or 3D from the street, you're seeing exactly what was there before. There's an overhang being built on the south side, which is the left side. You can see in the right picture. That is designed to mimic the overhang of the house that it's right next to. The soffit on the overhang of the house is black. I have that same black metal being used as the roof on my shed. The window, it's blocking a window that's behind it. I have a window framed for the exact same position on the shed using a custom-made window that's already been purchased and made. It's 1 foot tall, so no one can fit through it, and it's high enough off the ground that thieves won't be inclined to like peek into it. So it's designed to increase privacy while again looking like a design element of the house, which Nick said would be valuable. The orientation is southeast facing the same way that the house is. The heat pump zoning downstairs in this building has already, they said I don't need approval for it because it hasn't actually been relocated. It's simply been rotated. No new lines were run or anything like that. It's in the same position. In theory, it's just been rotated 90 degrees. Again, it was broadsiding the street before. Now it's been brought out a feet in order to get around that corner and rotated 90 degrees. And zoning has confirmed that that's totally fine. And the metal housing still exists to cover it. I think it's an eyesore in the front yard. I thought it from the very first time I went to see the house, and I've been thinking how to make it prettier, and my idea was to make it minimally invasive by being minimally visible from the street. So why does this already exist if I don't have a major modification approval from it? As Nick alluded to, I bought the house in November. I needed the shed right away. There's a reason I didn't get building it until August, and that's because I wanted to do everything right. This is my first home I've owned. I went through the whole process of talking to one person who sent me to another person who sent me to another person who tried to make this thing proper. And I eventually ended up in Nick's office with a certain ordinance of the city that allowed the planning director to give permission to build an accessory structure in the front yard of my house. I made it very clear I've never done anything like this before. I showed him pictures of the house, and I showed him a drawing with a 6x8 foot shed. Or excuse me, I didn't have that yet. He said, submit the drawing of the 6x8 foot shed. I went home, I submitted the drawing. Before I heard back from him, I talked to some designers. They said, you want an 8x8 foot shed because that's not going to fit. So what was kind of left out, may I use this computer, Nick? Okay, cool. What was left out is the reason that there was any confusion on the one drawing that had the 6s crossed out is because we had a very casual conversation. It didn't seem like it was a big deal. And I'm like, a 6x8 foot shed? He's like, sure. I emailed him back. I'm like, actually, I want to do an 8x8 foot shed. All I did, and this is in the text of the email, which I hope you guys saw, I said, I'm changing the 6x8 foot shed to an 8x8 foot shed. Everything else on that document was the same. I crossed out the 6s and I wrote 8s directly next to them in the same orientation. Nothing else changed on the whole document. And it was written in text that I'm changing a 6x8 foot shed to an 8x8 foot shed. I'm happy to just address this dispute more in length. It's been my center of my world now for a few months. It's all I'm trying to resolve because I want to finish moving into my house. I do believe some of the wording in the staff report you received is written to read as though I was maybe being dodgy or deceptive. I want you to know that was not the case. I wouldn't have gone to such great lengths to make this a reality and then be dodgy at the last second. I tried to do everything right as indicated by Nick and as instructed by Nick, excuse me. I'm also happy to explain the dispute over sizing referenced in the plans. I did not make a shed larger than the one that was approved. I made the exact shed that was approved. It's actually a little bit shorter, and the numbers on the plan all reflect reality accurately. That's both on the plan that was submitted and approved, and also on the plan that was presented in more detail here, and hopefully you guys have a not so pixelated version. The public comments that you received don't seem to address the PUD's intent. But I understand that they're concerns of my neighbors and thus they're valid concerns. No one has approached me about it, but I reached out to everyone that I know complained. One of them addresses on record the contents of a room in my house and also what I'm planning, and it's conjecturing what I'm planning to put in my shed. And that made me super uncomfortable. It referred to fancy gear. And I don't know how someone thinks they know what's in my house or what I plan to put in my shed, but I'm happy to address each of these concerns, as I said. At this rate, the shed's incomplete nature is what's keeping me up at night. It's what's preventing me from finally moving into my first house. It's making us feel unsafe at home because we have this structure that's welcome. Or that's welcoming to people experiencing homelessness or other people. It doesn't have a ceiling or doesn't have a roof on it, but it's got a ceiling and it's got 3 walls. And it's what's making me feel removed from the community that I moved to Central 9th to join. Yeah, sure. I want to answer any questions you have about how my shed is in line with the PUD's intent, because I live in that PUD and I wake up to that intent and I feel it every single day, and I feel as though I'm really in touch with it, and I'm happy to take your questions. Thanks for having me.
There are I think you've probably been honest with the process, and I know this has probably been confusing, and 2, bless you, you've gone through a lot for this shed.
Thanks.
Talk me through why it has to be in this way, though, and why you can't have something that's, I've seen even, the sheds they're flatter, they open up the doors, you still put stuff, they're still 8 feet long, maybe 3 feet wide, the stuff that would fit in that alcove and kind of fit, not necessarily, I'm not concerned with the intent of the PUD, I'm concerned about just the way that the setbacks and structure kind of are established. So they would fit more in line with the setbacks in place.
Yeah, sure. So my house still has a more of a setback than other houses that have backyards even. And and this has actually been brought up a couple times because no one is me, and thus no one knows how I want to use what I've built already. Are you like specific? Would you like specifics of how I plan to use it? And that's why I want. I mean, like the reason I didn't propose an 8 by 3 foot shed is because like I have no desire for that. Like I know what I need in order to kind of live my life, my professional life, and that's what I need. So that's the reason it was proposed as such. Does that answer your question, Matt?
I made one of the few planning commissioners that was on the commission when the plan development went through, and I do remember this.
Oh, cool.
And so I'm just trying to figure out why. I get the need for a shed, I get the need for storage, I get that it's a small space, I get that you don't have a backyard, but like why, I mean, even on Costco, there's storage units that are 8 feet by 30 inches, 33 feet. I just don't understand why, like I don't know what you're storing there, but it would fit bikes, it would fit yard tools, it would fit materials, climate, it would lock. I'm trying to decide why you need us, why we're here was probably what the neighbors are trying to figure out too.
Sure, yeah. And I mean, the truth is, so I don't have a backyard. I don't have what's technically considered a side yard. I don't have a basement. I don't have a mudroom. The things that have gotten stolen is because we've had muddy boots that we had to leave outside of our front door because we don't have a place to bring them. That's just the way the house was designed. And I bought into that 100% because I was told during the disclosures that I would be able to build a shed with HOA approval, this shed, right? The reason I'm building it is because, like I said, I sold my around town car as soon as I bought the house because I wanted to live the intent that was talked about. And so I have a couple bikes now. I need a place to work on those bikes. I need a place to store my snow tires for my road trip vehicle. I have these things that I think any normal person has. I have to be able to shovel the sidewalk. I don't have a place for a snow shovel right now. And those are the things. So those are just leaning against the back of the side of my house right now. And I think that's what's invited the unwelcome visitors in my yard so far. So the idea is to just, you receive a box, just somewhere to throw it. And the idea is to have a place to work, to stand up inside of, to store 4 bicycles, and to have a little workbench. And this is the smallest usable space. I went into those Costco's, I went into Home Depots and walked in the sheds and I had my tape measure and I was figuring out the smallest space. Now, to answer the question, why this one, why I would have already spent $11,000 on an 8 by 8 foot shed, that's simply because because I'm invested in this community too. I don't want an eyesore on the side of my house more than my neighbors do, trust me. And thus, I wanted this thing to look like an addition to the house. It turns out the house was made with really expensive cedar siding. And so that's the only reason I've gone to such length to design this perfect thing. This is my dream house. This is my life savings put into it, and this is just what I need to make it functional for me. And unfortunately, I won't be able to stay there if this doesn't work out.
I'm trying to find a picture that would show the south side of your unit. Is there a possibility that a shed could go there?
There's not. So in the original design, and the intent of the Jefferson sidewalk is that it maintains visibility down the sidewalk. That's what I originally proposed, and the HOA has all decided that they want to maintain visibility down that, which all of our houses have these overhangs on them that you can see just starting on the top, on the right picture. You can see that black soffit. That's an overhang, and that goes all the way down. So there's Jefferson Walkway, which you can see all the way down the block, or the half block, and then beside that, there's whatever that is, 8 feet. That you can also see. And everyone voted to maintain that visibility, and I wanted to respect my neighbors.
And that side really is kind of the effective front yard of those properties, even though you've kind of got 2 front yards.
That's exactly right. Everyone else's front yard on the property is considered south-facing, even though my house is exactly identical. According to Nick, it's considered east-facing, which is where the shed is. And that's why no one else has this problem, because their effective front yard is different than mine, even though our houses are all identical.
We see a lot of projects like this lately. And
is that right?
Well, I mean, similar in the sense that we're seeing projects turn sideways, multiple units, and we have that front unit that's on the street. That is the front yard, because that is what most of the public sees as the
totally.
front yard.
And that's why I went to Nick originally, because I found the ordinance that explained he's allowed to permit this in the front yard, and I knew it wasn't going to be an eyesore. It looks like the house. And it gets rid of that heat pump. Everyone's looking behind me. Is he like doing charades to you guys or something like that?
I think we'd be good to have a public hearing.
Step back, and we're going to have a public.
Cool.
We're going to
Thank
have
you
a
for your
public
time,
hearing
guys, and
on
for your
this.
service.
Thank you. So we'll open the public hearing on this item. I have cards from 2 people. Is there anyone from the community council here? Okay. Eric Denitz? Eric? Huh?
Yeah, there was somebody who gave their card and they put comments on it because they had to leave.
Oh. Okay. So, and the other one was Amy Karen, and she didn't want to speak. So I'll just read the comments. From Eric Danitz, he says, we own 851 and 841 Jefferson Street and would ask the council not to allow the modification to 830 Jefferson. Our concerns are threefold. The modification ruins the aesthetic continuity of the Jefferson Walkway. 2, it sets a precedent of setbacks being closer and closer to the street, violating the spirit and letter of the law. 3, it violates the spirit of the original approval of Jefferson Walkway. 4, it invites unwanted curiosity, activity, and potential safety issues in a neighborhood where residents have been striving to eliminate illegal and unsafe activities. Please do not allow this modification at our neighborhood to continue, and please require the structure to come down. The second one from Amy Caron says, we are also owners of 2 homes on Jefferson that we rent. We still reside in the neighborhood. The allowance of these type of structures in front yards decreases the aesthetic value of the historic Jefferson Street. We do not want our neighborhood to decrease in aesthetic value. People who need more storage should purchase properties with sufficient storage for their needs and/or obtain an off-site storage facility. So those are the 2 cards I have. Is there anybody else who wants to speak on this item? Okay, I'll close the public hearing. Huh? Oh. Come on up. State your name into the microphone.
My name is Garth Hare with Benchmark Modern, and I was the original developer. And this clearly does not meet our design standard that we used on the walkway, and I don't think it meets the original intent. We went to,
You need to speak up into the microphone.
great lengths to let it have the fit in with the existing neighborhood. And I mean, you could clad this thing in gold and it's still gonna be an eyesore along the walkway.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Come on up. Get up close to the microphone and say your name.
My name is Donald Emerson. I'm a trustee of the Jefferson Walkway Homeowners Association, so I'd like to clarify where the HOA is on this matter. We adjusted, as we adopted the declarations, to require at least 51% of the homeowners to approve structures of this kind. Mr. Levin requested that we adopt or give him approval to proceed. He had 4 votes, which is more than 51%. We made that based upon plans and sketches, that some of which you have seen here, and our understanding at that time was it would be an 8-foot by 8-foot shed. And that was in part reinforced by the letter from the city. We now see that the shed has different dimensions than what we were expecting it to be. The HOA has not taken a position at this time on what we think should happen.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, we'll close the public hearing and bring staff back up, I guess. Do we have questions? Or do you
Nick,
want me to bring the applicant up too?
Clark.
I've got a question for Nick. It kind of seems to me that initially this guy came in with a 6x8 shed. You read the wall as being 6 feet, so you thought, oh, this only protrudes out a foot or two. That's cool. I'm going to approve it. But then he came back with the revised shed that was 8x8, and you guys approved that still, considering, oh, it's not sticking out terribly far. But then later we all realized that the building doesn't actually stick out as far as you thought, so the shed actually sticks out much further. And so that's kind of the reason that it doesn't meet the requirements now and you don't want it approved. But ultimately, it kind of seems like it comes down to the fact that the planning commission, or the planning staff, for whatever reason, doesn't go out and measure these things exactly, or didn't verify that actual length there. They misinterpreted the plan.
Yeah, so we basically, our code doesn't, states that for accessory buildings, all we need is a drawing. And that's what we approve accessory structures with, based on all the time. And we have to take the applicant's word for what they put on their plans.
So, but reading what the applicant submitted, obviously there was somebody who misinterpreted something. I don't know that the applicant put any incorrect information, because they didn't label the building, they just labeled the shed. And they labeled that that the shed would go out 7 feet from the wall with a 1 foot gap. So then it seems like when he changed the plans to say it would be 8 feet, then it didn't occur to anybody that that part of the house was actually only 4 feet.
Right, because we weren't provided with that measurement.
Right.
And so we had to, which frankly isn't unusual for things like this.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, we don't require a great deal of information. We see the hand-drawn things all the time. It's just usually when we're talking a foot from a rear property line, it's
Mm-hmm.
not as doesn't rise to this level of an issue. But like I explained, how we came to that, and that is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So.
But am I correct in assuming there was a mistake in assuming that it was 6 feet out rather than 4 feet? And had you known initially that it was 4 feet, you would probably have denied it?
We would have basically said that it's a major modification, would have had to come to the planning commission.
Okay. So then it would have become a major modification,
and we
would have been in this exact same situation that we're in now, deciding whether he can build this at what he's proposing.
Right. The only difference is he
already has some
likely, he may not have proceeded down the path. So.
Nick, I mean, help me real quick, just as I'm trying to figure this out. Typically we have a standard or something we're trying to compare this to or not. You know, in this sense, a shed is not on the original plan development.
Right.
Right. You're saying it's major because it's going outside of the front block face, kind of that linear side? I mean,
So we're saying it's major because of two things. And one is that we do think it's encroaching further into the required front yard more than what is the minimum necessary to provide some storage. And two, I know that the applicant said that zoning had approved that mechanical equipment. Zoning has not approved it because it doesn't violate zoning. The code reviewers and the permit people may have said, yeah, we're not going to require you to get an additional permit there, but
modifications that have occurred are changes in the front yard setback and changes in the utility placement
Right.
that we're because we approve those. The fact that there was a shed on there or was not a, because there was not a shed in the original development, the original developer was here and clearly didn't envision any sheds, as far as I could tell from his statement. But someone could still build the shed because he's the developer, he no longer owns it. It's not somebody else's to own. The question is whether or not we feel, so it's with the setbacks that we approved were changed in a material or significant way, and whether utility placement was changed in a material way from the original plan.
Correct.
That would make it a major.
Correct.
And if we deem that it is a major, or modification, then we say, no, we can't go forward, you have to submit a new plan.
Yeah, so basically, the planning commission has three options, right? I mean, one, it's clear you can, if you find that it's not in substantial compliance with the intent of the original plan development, you can deny it. You can also approve it if you think it is, and so that would be option 2. Option 3 is you can approve some modification or variation on what's been proposed, in which case that's what the applicant would do. If you deny it, basically it means that in order for the applicant to get approval, he'd have to submit a new plan development application and meet all of those standards for the plan development, which is probably, I mean, frankly, if you're going to say no, I couldn't imagine how you'd ever find that it would meet the standards of a plan development.
And why are we back here trying to figure out if this does or does not meet the plan development, instead of looking at variance or another tool, within planning and zoning?
Because the plan development ordinance establishes this process for modifications. So, it's conceivable that if it is a no, then, I mean, the property owner could submit a variance application. A variance has a very high bar. One of those is that it can't be a situation that's created by a property owner. In this case, the development went through a process to create this situation. It's not the zoning ordinance that's creating a hardship. It's the actual development that has created that hardship. Personally, I think that would be a hard variance to approve. That's up to a hearing officer to figure that out. But in my experience, I think that would be a bar that would be really, there's no special exception authorized for this. Yeah.
So when we approve these plan developments, though, even though that the developers come and gone and sold the property, all the stuff that we approved stays in perpetuity.
Until it's somehow altered, that's correct.
Okay. And real quick with sheds, so let's just say sheds, if I'm building a shed in my backyard, what do I need to do?
So,
yeah.
So there's two things. Well, three things. First is you have to be a minimum of 1 foot from a rear or side property line. You're supposed to be at least 10 feet from any neighboring principal building, so from a house on a neighboring yard property. And then you're going to have some lot coverage restrictions. So you can an accessory building can be up to 50% of the footprint of your home. And then there's your total lot coverage, depending on your zone, is anywhere from 30 to 50%. The rear yard coverage is basically 50%. So there's those types of things that we would look at. If a building is less than 200 square feet, it does not require a building permit. And so we do have situations where people will call us, they'll ask what the setbacks are, and they'll just go build. And they won't have any sort of approval because there's none to give.
And
that's basically every tough shed in the
I
valley.
mean, if I'm removed from the plan development process, and there's a lot of homes that are on corners,
Mhm.
and typically on those corners, the homeowner themselves gets to choose which is the front yard and which is the side yard for their own setback, or their rear yard for their own setback, and determine setbacks, right? I mean, they could choose like whether it's on one street or the other?
No, they don't necessarily get to choose, because our ordinance includes what's called the front yard and then the corner side yard. And generally, the front yard is the yard that, I mean, the easiest way to think about it is where the front entrance to the house is. And then the other side
At home.
right, the other side is the corner side yard. And there are some regulations for accessory buildings can't be located in a corner side yard, and if they have to be at least 20 feet from that property line along a corner side yard.
So if I were building a shed in a side yard, on a corner side yard, what are my setback restrictions?
You from the property line that's along the street, you have to be 20 feet from that property line and at least 1 foot from the rear property line.
That's in any zone, or?
That's in any zone. That's all accessory buildings have that regulation.
So even if we're saying that this is his side yard, right, he still does not meet that standard, because he's still going out
It's closer than 20 feet.
closer than 20 feet.
Yeah.
He'd still need to be back in line, even if we were to determine this was a side yard.
So then I'm trying to look through back here on the staff report and how did we get an approval on this if it's encroaching into that side
Yeah, so
yard?
this is where the old planned development ordinance is odd, is that, one, it had that statement I was talking about that the approved development plan, rather than any other standard in the zoning ordinance, dictates the future use and development of the property, which means once you're approved, everything else except I think everything else not pertained in here in the plan development approval goes away.
So if the
And-
plan development is silent,
That's exactly the problem. That's why we changed that standard. We got rid of it to basically say only those things specifically modified by the planning commission apply. All other regulations not modified, they still have to adhere to. If we had that at the time that this was approved, then I would likely have interpreted that as meaning I don't have the ability to approve something that goes into a required yard like that.
But at the time that wasn't in place, so you didn't
At the
consider
time,
it.
that's not how it was worded.
Okay. Thanks I know you've explained this to me like 3 times now.
That's fine. It gets confusing when you have these moving parts, for sure.
So, Nick, is the building, I think I read you said in the report that it actually is 8 by 10.
So we can, the applicant explained that kind of overhang and those walls extending out. We consider that part of the building. That would ultimately be the footprint. And so those walls would be measured from corner to corner with that. And so
So with the overhang, it's measuring 8 by 10
8
plus.
by whatever was shown on the plan, yeah. 10 feet, 8 inches, I think is what that says.
That third plan, or the drawing in the upper left-hand corner, that was submitted after your approval of an 8 by 8 by 8 structure.
Right, that was in response to the major modification.
Okay.
So
Was it 8 by 8 by 8 or 8 by 8 by 6, or 8 by 6?
I think your letter says 8 by 8.
It was 8 by 8.
Is what you
That's what the
approved.
approval letter said.
Okay, and so you're saying if you had realized that the out-facing part on that right side was only 4 feet, you would have said it was a major modification?
Yeah, I think that's likely what I would have done. I think that's consistent with what we've said in others. I mean, this is an unusual situation
Yeah.
because I can't think of a time where we have had this type of proposal. But in other situations where we have had requests for minor modifications, we do the minimum necessary to address the situation.
Would have done a
Otherwise, we kick
major-
it to the planning commission.
Yeah, so you would have done a major modification and kicked it to us, but he did get approval from you for an 8 by 8.
8 by 8 based on, and the wording in the ordinance says something to the effect that it's mostly behind the front wall of that structure. So that part that you see in the picture to the right on the screen that's wrapped in wood, even though we approved up to 8 by 8, most of it would have to be in that alcove. So that's how we interpret that approval. If it's not, then it's outside the scope of the approval.
Don't take this personal, but is whether you did or did not make a mistake in saying that he had an 8x8 right matter to us on the commission? Or are we just looking at whether or not it's a...
Frankly, I don't think it does. To me, it's a separate issue that
Yeah.
we'll deal with if we have to,
We're not
based
here
on
to
the
judge
outcome
whether
of
this
this.
did or did not make a mistake or give
Right.
poor advice. We're here to judge whether or not this shed is a major modification to the plan development as presented.
I think that's correct.
Right, that's why
And I don't take anything personal, so you can say whatever you want to.
So we're just judging.
Go for it.
Be approved, then if it's a major modification and you kicked it to us, then we're approving that we think it's okay or it's not okay. Is that what's then before us?
So
for a major
approval would
modification?
mean it's okay. If you don't think that it meets the
So if
the
we
approval
approve it,
standard.
we're saying we think that this major modification is okay.
Approval is we don't think what's presented is a major modification, right?
No, you are
Oh, we're
approval.
approving a major
If you
modification.
approve it, you're approving the major modification to
Been
allow.
deemed this is a major modification
That's right.
already.
That's basically, if it's by ordinance, if it doesn't fit those minor modification requirements,
And
it's
you've-
automatically
and
major.
you've already made that decision.
And we've made that call. Right.
So really, the key issue, though, is that based on the information that was given, there was an approval made at the time, and we have half a structure here that we have to decide to tell him to take down or approve a major modification. But the staff is showing that in actuality, even what was submitted isn't correct because they're measuring now a 10-foot building, 10 by 8, right? So that throws another little loop into everything.
Then I guess, a question for other commissioners is, how do I word it? So when does a major modification be okay is in how it's going to end up looking? I guess I don't even know how to judge if a major modification is something that is okay or not okay.
Well, my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the reason it's a major modification is that it extends into that setback too far. It extends further than the average of that block face. And so we're needing to decide whether if that's okay or not. Because it sticks out further if you look down
Really,
Jefferson
that
than the
is
rest
what
of the
we're honing
porches.
in on,
That's
is just if it's extending too far for,
Correct. If the planning commission decides to approve it, you can require that it to be constructed as indicated by the applicant with the materials, et cetera.
we're
that
really
they
looking
describe.
at, is it encroaching too far into this front yard?
Yes, I think that's correct.
So do we want to hear from the applicant? Let him respond to the questions. I think you should have an opportunity.
It's up to you
It's
guys.
commission practice to
Yeah.
let the applicant respond to the public comments.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's have him respond to the public comment, and maybe there'll be other questions that we have.
Sorry, I didn't hear what you just said, sorry.
I just said, let's let you respond to the public comment, and if that generates other questions that we might have, then that's good.
Oh, cool, yeah. Well, thanks for the lively conversation for something that's just a shed and not it's not 200 feet. But as I said, I never meant to deceive anyone. The little awning on the south side that you see on the right photo was added actually as a design element that was added because the builder and I decided that it would best mimic the house. I originally said that I'm happy to compromise by paying to have that removed because I want to compromise here. I want to be as easy as easy as possible. I do think from a design standpoint, I think it makes more sense to have it. I had to pay extra to have that thing put on there because it mimics the house more, and I do think it looks better. But if that's a compromise, I'm willing to work with you guys. And the other thing I wanted to address during the public comment is that the numbers the HOA did get this exact plan, the one you see on the left there, and that's what they approved. And it's not your job to determine whether or not the HOA voted for it, but the HOA is comprised of my neighbors, and those are the people I care about and whose opinion I care about. And so they did not come to me with any problems with that at all. Are there any other questions from you guys while I'm thinking here?
I just have a question.
Yeah.
I'm not super familiar with the whole project layout and where there's common HOA space and not.
Sure.
Has there been any discussion with the HOA? Is there similar problems with other people in the project that perhaps there's some common space that could be utilized for storage rather than using this space?
Totally, yeah. We had talked about doing like a storage locker sort of thing over by our carports, which are a quarter block further west on an alley. That would be great if we did those there. That's not what I'm proposing at all, but we did talk about, because everyone wants a little bit of storage. The benefit is everyone else can put their big ticket items behind their tall gates in their own yards. I'm unable to do that, and that's why I'm just looking for kind of a fair opportunity here. And one of the public comments also mentioned that it changes Jefferson Walkway. It is not visible from Jefferson Walkway, and it does not stick out into Jefferson Walkway at all. I moved to Jefferson Walkway because I like it as is, and I don't want to modify it.
Yeah, this changes the street front on Jefferson.
Sure.
On Jefferson Walkway.
And it still is not sticking out as far as many of the houses do. That blue line, you can see it went through some of the houses. Some of them it didn't even, like look at the bottom two houses right there, like their setback is actually much lower than that blue line indicates. It's going through them, right? So it doesn't stick out that far.
So we went on a field trip today and saw this, but one thing that I wish we would have looked at now is what does the backyard of the rest of your neighbors look like? Because you don't have a backyard. Your house is set back on that back corner of your lot.
Sure.
But everybody else has some sort of backyard. What does that look like?
Right. So if you look in the red circle there, that's a good example because it shows the yard between our two houses. So the left wall, my house is the one on the right there. The left wall of my house, the west wall, is their border of their yard. And then can you guys see the mouse up there? Mm-hmm. They have a tall fence right here that prohibits anyone from seeing into their yard back here. And so that's what their yard is smaller than mine, but it's completely private. And while I'm thinking of it, sorry, the other thing is that all the complaints made were, again, they were made based on what it is right now, which is what you guys saw today as well. It's further, the setback is less right now than I'm proposing because it's moved out so the construction can happen. It's not where it would be, and it's also obviously not finished. So people are making complaints about its aesthetic without actually knowing what its aesthetic is, which is identical to my house. And I went to great lengths to ensure that, really, because I want to respect the community and my neighbors while making a functional house for myself. Making a house a home, if you will.
So each of those buildings, each of your neighbors have the same amount of kind of what's your front yard, but it's their side yard.
Correct.
Except you have a little bit more because you're the front there.
Yeah, I've got like an extra foot or something like that. The difference being that theirs is completely private and enclosed in my
So they could feasibly build this same kind of shed on their
Precisely. Our HOA voted to allow sheds in their yard up until the height of the fence, I think. And I can't see into their yard, so I don't know if anyone's constructed things, but they certainly leave their spare tires or grill or whatever in there that I would like to have in my shed, because I just have no, and I didn't know.
The height on that is 6 feet for a fence in this
Say it
area?
again?
Is it required to have a no higher than a 6 foot fence for those houses?
The HOA or the zoning or the.
Well, I assume the zoning probably affects the height of the fence.
Well, those fences aren't in the yard, so I'm not actually sure. I can't see over those fences, so
Anybody?
I'm not sure how tall those fences are, but it'd be plenty tall enough to have something you could walk into, for sure. And had this all come up before I built it, I would be amenable to compromise the same way I am now. It's just that I built it following the exact rule, And as far as I didn't know the footprint included that overhang. As I said, it came in at the last minute. There's no foundation under that footprint. As you can maybe see in the photo, it's just open. And as I understood, the overhang on the house also didn't count into the footprint because it's not touching the ground. That was my oversight. I did not know that. Again, this is all new to me. The same reason that the way I wrote my numbers on my plan were never questioned, and thus I thought they were okay because I've never made a plan before, But they are all accurate. If they are misinterpreted, that's one thing, but they're accurate. The information is all in the plan, and that's all as designed, as approved, and as built. This is something I really care about. It's like been consuming my entire life, so.
Did you build this or have someone?
No, I vetted 7 companies throughout the state of Utah, actually, which are all like the shed and small building experts. And I ended up going with the one that instilled the most confidence that they would make it match my house. And then I paid more on top of that to hire the owner of the company, who has 15 employees. I hired him to be the construction foreman to build it himself, because he understood how unique it was and what a design element is to our street and how important it is to be good. So I paid a premium for it, and I couldn't build as beautiful as this. I could probably build this, but I can't build what it's going to look like eventually.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for your question.
Any more questions?
If there's any doubts at all, please throw it at me, because I'd love to address it.
You're definitely passionate about this.
Thank you. I mean, it's my house, you know.
So do we want to get Nick back here?
This has been my 10th time in this building, probably in the past 2 months.
Yeah, I would like to ask staff or Nick. So with the HOA has approved his neighbors to each build a shed in the exact same position, from what I'm hearing, as long as it's not higher than the fence. Is there a regulation on the fence? Is it supposed to be 6 feet?
Yeah, fences are 6 feet.
So all of his neighbors can build a 6-foot high shed exactly in the same spot. And the reason he can't
basically every shed would be subject to the same kind of process that he's in. Yeah, because the way these work is that everything is in a required yard, and none of them actually have true rear yards. And
so then would they be looking at minor or major modification?
Again, we would try to keep it as minor as we can, depending on the situation. I think one of the hard parts is that not all of those properties have 10 feet in between them.
Okay.
And from a fire code perspective, that could be problematic, because there's some separation requirements from other structures, from homes, basically, and that could be problematic for those property owners.
And Clark, I could also be misquoting our HOA. All I know is that we're allowed sheds. I don't know if it's the height of the shed or if it's visible or whatever, or excuse me, the height of the fence.
But
everyone is allowed that.
It is different if it's a habitable shed, one you could walk into, versus
I think that's what I'm trying to get at.
Versus
is
a
what can all of his
lean-to
neighbors
or
build
or
that's
those
different
boxes
than what
that you
he's allowed to
see.
build.
Yeah, so all of that, it really depends on what somebody is proposing.
Okay.
And speaking of lean-to, this is designed, the drainage from the roof comes out these pipes right here, and the slope of the roof on the shed is designed to allow the drainage to run off into the drainage for my house, out and underneath the patio, out into the yard. So down to the detail. And you can see this is the grate the housing that covers it to allow it to be a little more aesthetically pleasing.
I guess so. I mean, certainly you've put in a ton of thought to this, and I think it's well designed.
Thank you.
Whether it looks appealing or not, I think is a little subjective.
It's whether or not you like my house, right?
And I think even, yes, it encroaches into that front yard, essentially 4 feet further than the average, but there's houses on that street that encroach as far. I think my question though is just, if he was 1 unit up, he'd be allowed to build something, but it probably wouldn't be this. It'd be something, maybe a more shallow building, or maybe a lower building. We wouldn't be looking at the same issues, I guess. It's a really unique situation because of the geography and the orientation of the house.
Nick, I'm having a really hard time grabbing onto what should help drive a decision. Because apparently you've already made the decision, some major modification. That was originally, I thought I had it, but then I lost it. it's a turn. It's a major modification of the plan development. Clearly, the plan development plot does not have a shed. The guy who came here and asked the plan development said, I envision this thing with no sheds, right? I mean, he made his testimony, he was here, he sat right in that chair.
Wait, is that a question, or is that's true? He proposed
said
no
that.
sheds.
He said that, like,
Interesting.
10 minutes ago.
Oh, I thought you meant when he originally was here. Okay.
And so, you got to take, that was his intent. He was the designer. I'm impressed that he's here. I'm not sure. But so, I mean, I'm just struggling with, like, there's that piece of it. But then looking at the two from, like, what, if we're trying to figure out how to make this work from a side, if this were a normal side yard corner property, is using those what would normally be allowed for a shed, is using that criteria reasonable or not? Because I talked to you all those questions about what a normal corner lot could do, and you still need a 20-foot setback. Is that a reasonable standard to be looking at, or not really? Is it not related to this? It's just whether or not we have to go on the intent of the plan development was intended for sheds, and the guy who's here says it wasn't.
Yeah, and I get that part, but I think we can only use kind of the intent and original purpose that was put on paper and discussed by the planning commission when it was approved. And so I actually went back and I reviewed the minutes and staff reports. I never found any discussion of sheds, which wouldn't be surprising, right? I mean, I don't know that we really ever discuss the sheds when we're looking at residential plan developments, but so I don't know how much stock you can put into that, honestly. I think what it comes down to is, and it's kind of, it is a little bit of a subjective type of thing, but what it comes down to is whether or not you think it is in substantial compliance with original approval for the plan development. And
not talk about sheds.
Which doesn't really talk about sheds. I mean, I think in the staff report, I included some of those statements. I think the applicant included some of those statements that were from the original applicant's information, the original plan development information.
Yeah, I'm happy to read that intent if anyone wants.
And I think that, I think that's what you have to use to base a decision on, whether or not you think it meets those statements.
I'd kind of like to just know where other people are, where are their thoughts on where we're headed with this conversation?
Let's get the planning director down here. Oh, shit.
I think really, in my mind, this kind of comes down to a subjective, does this look good in somebody's front yard, or does it look like a moving container or something? And I don't know that I want to answer that question, but in that case, in leaving it up to subjectivity, I leave it up to what the applicant proposes, and I think the size of it was what he proposed and what he got approved, and the rest of the issues were things that could have been looked at. The extension from the house along the front footage was something that could have been maybe looked at a little better, or for whatever reason, maybe the staff doesn't have the time or staff to go out and measure things like that. Maybe they could have looked at the original plans to see the measurements a little better. But he got approved an 8-foot by 8-foot shed there, and I kind of think that we need to let him have it, especially where he, based on that approval, started building a shed.
I'm afraid I'm where you are, and I say it that way because when we drive by, even if it has the same materials as the house, I don't like it. It's it's an eyesore, but I think he had this proved, and I don't think we get to move the goalpost in the middle of the game. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, and this isn't,
I don't know.
I think this is certainly, the cost of changing this is hugely on the applicant over, and really I think, you know, saying you need to cut off 4 feet of your building or something, I don't think that makes a material difference to how it looks. In fact, it may look worse like that. I just don't think we get a lot of improvement for making him change what he's already had approved and built. And whether we like how it looks in the end is completely up to our own preference, which doesn't matter here.
You know, I think another question for me is looking at how this encroaches into the front yard setback, and is it really out of line with the rest of the street? And I think we can clearly see there's some variation, and this isn't really pushing the boundaries on those variations. So if this came before the Planning Commission, I wasn't here in 2016, but if it came before the Planning Commission at that point and actually did include a shed, I feel like probably most likely would have been approved. To have, you know, a reduced setback in the front yard for this particular unit. And we've certainly, obviously, if the Planning Commission approved a 0 setback, which I probably would never be inclined to do, especially now, I'll never be inclined to do it. So we don't have to do this before in the future. But I don't know that this is out of line with what seems to have been approved 2 years ago. I don't know, I'm really looking at is this really encroaching in the setback in the front yard in a substantial way that causes conflict with the rest of the street? Because it doesn't affect Jefferson Walkway at all.
So I'd be willing to make a motion.
Please do.
Based on the information presented and the input received during the public hearing, I move that the Planning Commission approve the major modification to the Jefferson Walkway plan development based on the finding that the proposal is in substantial conformity with the plan development because the proposed setback is consistent with the averages along Jefferson Street and the proposal does not impede with the design or function of the Jefferson Walkway, with the following conditions: that the accessory building is constructed in conformity with the plans presented at the Planning Commission hearing.
I'll second.
Any more discussion?
I guess I want to, I mean, I'm also curious of approving it based on the 8x8, not the 8x10 and 8 inches. I just want to hear where people are at on that, because that's what he got approval for. I'm really comfortable with agreeing that an 8x8, and that's what the HOA approved, that is good, and making him modify the extra 2.8.
I feel like that might be a reasonable thing to change, especially where he was initially approved an 8x8x8, and then the design changed, and he didn't go back and change his application, right?
And I don't think that was any intent on the applicant to try to get away with something. I think I can totally see that it was the builder, like, we could, mimic this overhang. I actually do see that, but I feel more comfortable in saying, all right, let's approve a major modification for an 8x8.
Would you?
Because that's what he got approval for. That's what the HOA approved. And
May I interrupt or no?
No.
Okay.
Thank you. Adrian, would you consider modifying your
would
motion?
you consider that a friendly amendment, Adrian?
Yes, so if we want to say that the accessory building is constructed in conformity with the plans presented at the Planning Commission hearing, except that the dimensions shall not exceed 8 feet by 8 feet.
I just have a question for Nick, if I could, hypothetically speaking.
Well, before we get there,
No.
we've got an amendment proposed.
Oh,
The
okay,
second,
that's right.
the person who seconded the original motion needs to accept that.
I thought if the original person who made the motion accepts the friendly amendment, you don't need.
According to the policies and procedures, the person who seconded has to agree to
Okay.
that as well.
So then the
Clark?
one question is, you say according to the plans presented in the Planning Commission, so the plan right on the first page is with an 8x8 structure with a little 2-foot extension there.
Except for, they shall not exceed 8 feet by 8 feet. The total dimensions shall not exceed. So if he wants to have his overhang go back, so as long as,
Yeah, he
you
can
know,
he can lop off the end of the building or whatever and still have his overhang. I'm fine with that, so I'll keep my
Okay,
second.
motion's amended to maximize it at 8 by 8. And the second was accepted.
So I'm probably a no, and I've struggled with this for a lot of different reasons. But I think where I'm going to come down at is, I think this body does a lot of work to try to get these sort of linear developments oriented more towards major streets, and it's been a major kind of picking point of ours, and it has been one consistently since the whole time I've been on the commission. And I think if this were to have come before us the first time, where that side on Jefferson Street would have been even more of a side or backyard, we would have said no, because we are doing a lot of work to try to end this thing where you're turning these homes into side yard properties. And so I think we would have said no then, and so I'm gonna say probably no tonight for that reason.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I have a hypothetical question if I can ask Nick. There is a side yard he's got to the side. If he had come with that same design on that side yard, would that have been approved or no?
Which side yard?
There's like a little
South or
10-foot
north?
Yeah, south, yeah.
No, in fact, I think we discussed that.
Okay.
And we said that would
Wouldn't work.
clearly fly in the face of the intent of the original approval.
Gotcha, thanks.
Okay, shall we vote? Amy?
Yes.
Carolyn?
Agree.
Matt?
Disagree.
Weston?
I'm missing being chair. And I think I'm gonna agree with Matt on this one, and I'm gonna vote a no.
Sarah?
I am voting yes. That's all.
Adrian?
yes.
And Clark?
Yes.
And Andres?
I will vote yes.
Okay, the motion passes.
Thank you for your time, guys. If anyone knows how to cut off an awning, please tell me. Oh, may I ask a question?
What? Yeah.
Can it still have like the roof of that awning? Like, I mean, not just based on
You
what
can
you
leave
voted
the
on.
front the same as you have it if you want to cut off 2 feet off the other end.
Oh, I can't do that. But so all 3 sides of that awning would have to come off. Okay.
Yeah, because that's considered part of your
It is, even-
year's
okay.
footage. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You volunteered for this, right? Let's see.
Did you read it? No, it's yours. Yeah. Personal education.
Okay, let's move on to our final item here. The work session for the Union Pacific Hotel Plan Development, Conditional Building and Site Design Review at 2 South, 400 West.
Okay, here we are.
All right, so tonight this is a work session for the Union Pacific Hotel that's being proposed, and I'll try to keep my introduction pretty brief in the interest of time. And we wanted to take this to you first as a work session because it's a larger, multifaceted project, and so we wanted to get your initial feedback or clarify any questions that you might have, and we have the architects and developers here tonight to have a conversation with. So HKS Architects and the Athens Group are proposing to construct an 8-story hotel building behind or on the west side of the Union Pacific train station at 2 South 400 West. Just for orientation, it's by the Vivint Smart Home Arena, or just to the west of that, and then it's kind of a part of the Gateway Mall development. The property is zoned GMU, Gateway Mixed Use, and this district is intended to create an urban neighborhood that provides employment and economic development opportunities that are oriented toward the economic development opportunities that are for people, and development that's oriented towards the pedestrian with a strong emphasis on safe and attractive streetscapes. The standards in this zoning district are also intended to achieve established objectives for urban and historic design, pedestrian amenities, and land use regulation. And so this area sits as one of our important entrances into the city, near the North Temple Viaduct, and so it's kind of a literal gateway into Salt Lake City. So just to show you quickly, this would be the existing west facade and then the proposal with the hotel building, and I'll let the architect go into detail. And then here's the existing east facade with the Union Pacific train station that's existing, and then you can see the proposal with the new hotel building kind of peeking up from the background. And so there are the planning processes that they are going through is first a planned development, so all new construction in the Gateway Mixed Use District must be processed as a planned development. Second, the applicants have elected to go through the conditional building and site design review process to gain some additional height. This district allows buildings up to 75 feet outright, and you can go up to 120 feet tall through this conditional building and site design process in exchange for more pedestrian-oriented design. And so here the developer, or the hotel, is being proposed at 99 feet tall at its tallest point. And then finally, this project will also be reviewed by the Historic Landmark Commission, as this is a local landmark building and a local landmark site, and the hotel building is on the same property as the historic train station.
Lauren, I have a question about that.
Yeah.
Clarification. So does the Historic Landmark Commission also have a purview over the interior of the depot?
They don't. I don't believe there's an easement on the interior. Carl might correct me if I'm wrong, but they will be any kind of modifications they need to make to the exterior for the interior improvements will have to be approved by the HLC. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but what would fall into, I guess now my follow-up would be, what would they do to the interior that would require an exterior modification?
There'll be signage. If for some reason they will be, I know this specifically, they'll be attaching those walkways. So if for some reason the walkways need to be modified, or they're not proposing, I don't believe, to modify any openings, but if some reason there's some small modification, they're doing new signage, new landscaping.
So they can do anything to the interior if it didn't affect the exterior?
I don't think there's an easement there. But they're proposing to preserve the interior.
I just wanted to clarify what HLC could be looking at. So
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. So again, this is kind of a discussion between you and the applicants. As noted in the staff report, you may wish to discuss the additional height request, the preservation of the public space, pedestrian-oriented design, the objectives of the different master plans, and the planning process objectives. So with that, I'll let the applicant take over.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to meet with you in work session. My name is Jeff Mongan. I'm with the Athens Group. We're the hotel development company working with Vestar, the owners of the Gateway. Here tonight, we have our team here tonight, Amir Tursik with HKS Architects. My colleague, Mark Sanford, is behind me here, and it's Scott Howell, who's assisting us with community outreach. We've been working on this project for a little over a year now, so what you'll see tonight is really kind of the culmination of a year of planning effort. Over the course of the last 3 months, there's been a considerable amount of outreach to the neighborhood councils. We had a great community open house at the Gateway a few weeks ago. It was a great opportunity to interact with the neighbors and the tenants at the center who are eager to see continued revitalization there. So with that introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Amir. We've intentionally condensed this down a bit. It's getting late. We understand people are getting tired. So we'd like to preserve as much time as possible for feedback and questions from the commissioners. Amir?
Thank you. Good evening. We've been working for this for a year and struggling how to condense this to a 20-minute presentation because it is a very complex project. However, after listening to the chat conversation, I promise it'll be way simpler than that.
Yeah.
The intent of the presentation, and given what time it is tonight, I'm sure you all love to go home and be with your families. We'll cut this 20-minute presentation to a 10-minute presentation because we really want to introduce the project, try to demonstrate the compliance with all the applicable guidelines and master plan. And then we'd also like to address any of your questions and concerns, which is the main reason why we're here. In terms of the plan development objective, as you probably know, the Gateway Master Plan requires us to comply with at least one out of the 6 objectives. We feel that our project meets at least 3 of them. Obviously, the historic preservation of a building. We'll show you how we intend to enhance pedestrian accessibility and mobility. And lastly, obviously, implement not only the city master plan, but all the design guidelines of the plan development. We started actually this project by researching the Union Station and found an extensive collection of historic images, which we'll save for the Historic Landmarks Commission, and we'll just skip right over them. But obviously, the building has a very long history. It wasn't only a station, it was actually a gathering space for Salt Lake City for many years, and we found a lot of images that we used as inspiration that kind of evoke this old-fashioned notion of travel that we would love actually to kind of reinvigorate with our project. And this is actually the oldest image of the Grand Hall itself in its glory days. And again, architecturally, we have no intentions of modifying any of the historic elements, but we do have a concept plan how to really try to activate it and kind of reinstate its original character and vitality. As you know, the building today, it has a long history, so it went through a lot of different alterations. Today, the building acts as a nightclub in the north wing and office space in the south wing. The Grand Hall itself actually was protected with a public easement to provide access from South Temple to the Gateway itself. Unfortunately, with the decline of the Gateway retail, the space today is extremely underutilized and abandoned for the most part, with the exception of a few private events that happen. We also researched a variety of similar projects. There's about 10 other Union stations in the States that have been converted into hotels. The most relevant and closest one being the Crawford Hotel in Denver that some of you may be familiar with. The Denver station did a really great job of reactivating the Grand Hall with a series of food and beverage and commercial retail that kind of permeate the perimeter of the station itself. There's a variety of food and beverage places that are used not only by travelers but also locals, just because of the location of the train station and in the middle of downtown, just like ours. This is a picture of the hotel bar that kind of overlooks the Grand Train Hall. Here's another example. This is the Hilton Hotel in St. Louis. In scale, probably much closer to our project. You can see how they converted it into a lobby lounge with a variety of seating, but it can also transform to host private events as well. So having said all of that, we started looking how our project complies with all the applicable master plans. You're all probably very familiar with the original Gateway Master Plan, so we're not going to dwell on it. We'd like to point out that the Gateway Master Plan specifically talked about the importance of assuring the vitality and importance of the Union Station, and even suggested a reuse or adaptation as a hotel lobby. The current Salt Lake City Downtown Master Plan envisions the entire depot district as a complete urban neighborhood with a mix of historic and new buildings, where historic buildings really define the character of the neighborhood, but the new buildings complement them. And that is exactly what we're trying to do with our project. So we'll get into some, but not all of the plan development or Gateway design standards, starting with the building context, massing, and orientation. As most of you probably know, and I don't know if you can see the cursor on this, the Union Station is basically placed along the South Temple central axis, and it provides access to the Gateway. So on one side, we actually have a track stop right here that provides access to the downtown and rest of the valley on one side, and airport to the other one, which is ideal for this type of a development. On the other side, we have a public plaza that it has a very high level of pedestrian activity. So the building already has that great potential to be both a transit and pedestrian-oriented development. Our building, the addition, which you now see the curvilinear form, is placed along the same axis. It will continue to provide access to the plaza through the station itself, but it will be oriented, its face will be really oriented towards the public plaza itself. The curvilinear form actually accomplishes a lot of things for us. First, it separates itself from the historic station, which is really important, that it allows it really to preserve its historic quality and its integrity. But second, it also corresponds to the existing context of the Gateway, because it's a very challenging design problem, if you want to call it that, because on one hand, we have a historic station we're trying to respect. On the other hand, we have a very eclectic and diverse Gateway context that we also have a responsibility to addressing. So we have kind of a dual issue in the facade, and we'll show how we intend to address that. This is the site plan that maybe describes a little bit better the orientation of the new building towards the plaza itself. You start to understand that axial access through the courtyard. We're actually about 17.5 feet at its closest point to the historic building, and then we basically jump away to about 42 feet. The connection to the existing building would be with a one-story building that would utilize the same openings that currently exist with the retail buildings, one-story retail buildings that were built in the 90s. This diagram intends to demonstrate how we intend to activate the Grand Hall so that it's no longer an abandoned space that it is today. And we intend to do it very similarly to the example of the Crawford Hotel that was shown. The way we intend to program the building really is all around the Grand Hall, so that the Grand Hall becomes kind of the heart and connective tissue of the entire project. We're not going to get into detail, but there would be a variety of hotel amenities and retail and food and beverage outlets that would permeate into the Grand Hall with 2 restaurants on each side, but also extend to a new exterior courtyard that again would be connecting to a coffee shop and a pre-function area, and then finally connect to the plaza itself. And you can see that a little bit better in this kind of a cleaned up floor plan version of that. Another thing we'd like to point out that there is an arcade here, which you'll see in the renderings, which is a commonly used element and actually suggested by the plan development guidelines at the Gateway that provides protection in the winter and in the summer as well. And then another thing that we have done to kind of animate and reactivate these pedestrian walkways, we have programmed majority of front of house spaces on the western side of the building itself. So we'll show you some three-dimensional renderings and diagrams that kind of demonstrate this a little bit better than the plans we showed you. We intend to basically reinvigorate the historic main entrance to the building with a primary orientation to the street, pedestrian access, and transit. We intend to provide new hardscape that kind of creates a more of a sense of arrival and an entry. This building perspective probably tells the story of the mid-block connection itself the best. So we're basically slicing right through the existing and the new building, only in the plans. But the idea really is to start out with a retail space on Fort West that has the opportunity to activate not only Fort West but the Grand Hall itself. You can see we're planning on having a mezzanine bar similar to the one we showed you in the Denver station that looks down South Temple but also overlooks into the Grand Train Hall. The Grand Hall itself, I think we kind of showed you the diagram, becomes this connective tissue and heart of the project and acts primarily as a lobby lounge but also a public space that then continues into a kind of an intimate semi-enclosed courtyard and then finally through the arcade to the plaza itself. So our intent is really to create a series of indoor and outdoor spaces that are activated through different programming, different scale, different design, so that it's not all simply a pass-through that it is today. This is a rendering of the courtyard as you're coming out of the historic station. This kind of gives you a sense of the ground level transparency, permeability, and access. We envision that these one-story structures would be completely permeable and kind of blur the boundary between the inside and outside. If this were a coffee shop, we would provide outdoor seating. On the other side, we intend to have a pre-function area so that the courtyard could be used as a breakout space. You start to get a sense how the signage and branding would start referencing the historic use of the building itself. We're also trying to create a place, not just a pass-through area, but a place that's comfortable with amenities that people will feel comfortable spending time in. And finally, this also gives you a sense how we're trying to frame the entrance to the plaza itself with the arcade that we mentioned before. From the opposite side, equally important, you can see how the arcade frames the entry to the courtyard and the historic building itself. You can see the existing Union Pacific doors at the very end. You're also starting to understand the dynamic nature of the base of the building. We intend to articulate it as a series of faceted storefronts with a high level of transparency with large windows. You can also start to see how we intend to blur the edge between the indoor and outdoor by providing large operable, not only windows, but walls as well. As far as the architectural articulation is concerned, as I mentioned, we have responsibility towards being sensitive to the historic building, but we also have to be complementary to the eclectic gateway context. The articulation specifically on the east facade facing the historic building needs to remain restrained and focused on details and simplicity so that it's not competing with the historic landmark. And last but not least, in accordance with the historic design guidelines, we'd like to reinterpret some of the historic elements of the existing building, but through a compatible and stylistically distinguishable design so that we're not trying to recreate the same architecture from 110 years ago. So this rendering from South Temple, we're actually elevated here as if we were coming out of the Vivid Smarts Arena, gives you a sense of what that east facade would look like. It is much more traditional and calm and subordinate in nature to pay respect to the historic building. Where the building is visible from South Temple, it is creating a backdrop for the historic building. The color that we selected complements the sandstone of the historic building without competing with its overall historic facade. We're breaking down these backdrop volumes through different texture brick and articulation of the brick, which again notes to the elaborate brickwork on the historic building without necessarily trying to copy it. The guest rooms on the east facade that you can see really from South Temple at the street elevations are articulated with deeply recessed windows in accordance with the gateway standards. They also frame the view of the historic building. So we love the idea that a lot of people that come visit Salt Lake City and happen to stay on this side will be looking at the station. In that sense, we're kind of celebrating the station and elevating its importance again. On the west facade, we obviously have a responsibility to address the gateway context and create a new plaza for the new face for the Olympic Plaza. So the articulation of the facade is much more playful and contemporary in nature. It is actually composed of a series of faceted, deeply recessed window bays that revolve along the western boundary. You can probably best see it if you look at the cornice of the building itself. it's kind of hard to capture the dynamic nature of this facade in a single static image, because the articulation and the change of the angle will interface with the sun daily and seasonally in a way where the building will be constantly changing its appearance. We are basically capping the top floor of the building with enlarged windows at the top level, and then the cornice itself, it's kind of a abstract of a historic cornice where it's not excessively detailed, but it's integrated with the rest of the facade and more appropriate for this expression, while still creating a very distinct roofline, unlike any other in this area. Some of these sections just give you a sense of how deep these windows are going to be. They're going to vary anywhere between 14 to almost 30 inches. The building materials, we propose brick, as we already mentioned, as the primary building material. We also propose stone at the base level to differentiate it from the rest of the building, and then some warm accents of bronze panel and wood. On the west, we consciously selected the gray brick color and not the red brick color to complement the historic building, but also to remain neutral and create a backdrop. Because we felt if we would have selected the red brick, the building would start competing and blending with a historic building. We're also using brick in two different ways. On the east facade, we're using it in a much more traditional way as a veneer, but on the west facade, we're using it in a kind of a more innovative way to create these new window frames. And as Lauren has already alluded to, we are pursuing conditional height approval to provide the required number of guest rooms and density that the project needs to be financially viable. There are two reasons for that. One is that there are two existing easements on the subject property, and they both provide public access to the gateway. One goes around the property, and the other one actually goes right through the property, reducing the buildable footprint. The other reason is, as we mentioned, we really like to stay away and give the historic building as much space as we can to breathe and maintain its integrity, which further limits our buildable area. So the proposed building height, as Lauren already mentioned, for the most of the building is about 95 feet for the main roof, and the only areas that would be 99 feet would be actually the two stair and elevator overruns. It's important to know that we worked really hard to keep the height of the building below the historic mansard roof. So from South Temple, as you see in this perspective, you would not see the new building. There's other buildings in this area that are about the same height. So from that perspective, our building would be very compatible. For instance, the Fidelity office building immediately to the north is over 130 feet. Immediately to the south, there are two other office buildings that are 7 and 8 stories in height. And obviously, there are a couple of residential towers that are over 10 stories tall. In accordance with the design standards for building height variance, we are articulating the top of the building with a cornice detail, which on the east facade is much more traditional as appropriate to this style. But on the west facade, as we already talked about, we are already creating a very distinct roof line that is unlike other, and a kind of an abstracted version of a cornice detail that's integrated with the entire facade. And lastly, we would also make sure that at night the exterior lighting kind of highlights the dynamic nature of the facade itself. So that was probably longer than 10 minutes, but thank you.
So can you go back to the slide showing the easements? And I'm just wondering, can you walk around the proposed hotel, or are you still funneled in through the courtyard as the only access to get from the east side to the west side?
You're talking about this around this way?
Yeah, so that's like the buffer in between, or no, that's the west side of the hotel.
Right. So
okay, so that's what I just wanted to clarify. So the pedestrian could bypass the Grand Hall and courtyard and still get around.
Yes, just like they do today.
Right.
Through the plan development process, you're modifying the height, and is there other things you're seeking to modify?
No.
Just height. And how much additional height was it?
We're at 95 feet, so it would be 20 extra feet if
Yeah.
I remember correctly.
75 feet's the height limit, so we're seeking 20 feet to the roof, and as he mentioned, about another 4 feet on the overrides and stair towers.
That's the plan development, not the design review. That height gets kicked in at the height restriction.
Design review for the height. All developments in the gateway have to go through plan development.
Is there any aspects of the zoning ordinance being modified or no?
No, just the height through the conditional building and site design.
So Lauren, then what is the purpose of all developments in the gateway going through the plan development?
Well, Nick, you might be able to speak to this better.
So back in 2000, when the GMU zone was created, that was the only process that the city had. The design review process didn't exist. And so when the zoning was adopted, they wanted to have some design review. And so they used the plan development process. It's actually on our radar to change that so that, similar to what we do in Sugar House, where buildings over a certain size would have to go through the design review, but if you're not over a certain size, you wouldn't have to. So.
I think you guys have got a fabulous design here. I'm really impressed by it. I've been to some of these other hotels that are converted train stations, and I think it'll really make a jewel in the city and a building that, I mean, that building is really beautiful inside, and I think you guys are interested in just making it more beautiful and usable, because I don't think a lot of us go there very often, so. Good.
Yeah, I actually am really impressed by it, which I normally am not impressed by a lot of the things that come before us. I'm usually depressed, but I'm really, really excited about it. And as far as the additional height, I think it's in line with what's there, and I'm really glad that you can't really see it from, say, the track station or, you know, whatever we're calling the Delta Center now, the Vivint, whatever. Yeah, it shows you how old I am. So I'm good with that. And, you know, I work about a block away in the other train station, Rio Grande. And I will tell you that I think the lobby in this one is by far prettier. So being able to activate the historic part of that, I'm really excited about. Because I think you don't need to change anything, but you can activate it. Because it is. I walk through it, and it's sad because nothing's happening there. At least in mine, it's a gallery, but that's just because of who's occupying the building. So the beauty of this depot interior is amazing, and it's an amazing part of our history. And just to be able to highlight that and get people there, I think I'm really excited about that too. So yeah, I'm actually really impressed by the whole project.
Yeah, and I also want to congratulate you on that. It was a very nice presentation overall, and you know, like it was said before, you highlight the beauty of that historic building. It's sad that we don't use it very often, so this will hopefully revitalize the area. So thank you.
You know, something that just occurred to me, I didn't even think about this while you were presenting, so maybe you mentioned it, I apologize, but where's the parking at for this?
Yeah, so the parking exists at the gateway. That's one of the nice things, is that we're utilizing parking within the existing garages at the gateway.
We're actually utilizing more than just parking. We do a lot of work nationwide. I don't think we've ever worked on a project where there is existing parking, existing loading, existing heating and cooling. And so we're actually tying into all of those systems, which will remove otherwise really ugly mechanical components out of public size. So
How many rooms in the hotel are you projecting?
It's 225. In the application, we say 210 to 225 because some of the operators have higher suite counts where they combine rooms to make bigger rooms, and so it'll be somewhere in that range. But 225 is really where we're at.
And you haven't selected an operator yet?
No, we haven't. There's a lot of interest. We've been touring a number of operators through, but we have not selected one yet.
When are you expecting to start construction?
We'd like to, it's kind of how quickly we can get through this process, but we'd like to get into our working drawings and be under construction in 2019 and be open in 2021.
Does the operator brand the hotel? Is it like, say, Hilton at the Gateway or something?
Yeah, so interestingly, there's different approaches, but we're kind of intrigued by really playing up the Union Pacific history and the branding of the hotel, and perhaps a soft brand where you tie into one of these major hotel companies' reservation networks, but the branding would all revolve around the Union Pacific Station Hotel, as you see on the signage and the renderings.
Well, I will just say that because of the nightclub, pretty much everybody calls it the Depot. So if you want branding that's kind of already existing specific to that site, we all just call it the Depot, and we all know where it is and what it means. So.
I'm curious, do you know, does the Denver project that's similar, did they have to build a separate structure to house the hotel rooms, or are there actual hotel rooms within the historic structure as well?
They built two wings, one of each side that you don't see, to basically provide guest rooms.
So they're on the,
Yes.
They're in the building, in the building, in wings of that building. We have about 15 rooms on the second and third levels of the southern wing of the existing historic building where the office space is right now. So we would repurpose that office space to suites within the historic building. But most of the guest rooms are in the new tower in the back.
Was there any ever a plan or a possibility or exploration of the idea of doing something that still allowed the station to be visible from the west, from inside of the Gateway? Or is it just, I know it's an awkward space and not a lot of space without taking out one of the Gateway buildings that already exist.
You can go ahead and I can follow.
Yeah, so one of the challenges is it's a very tight site, as Amir showed in the site plan, and there was some very early studies that had wings coming out of the north and south end of the historic building. Quite a bit of different execution, and there were some studies that had two towers coming up, going up quite a bit higher than we're showing in order to try to get the right guest room count, and those would have preserved, a pass-through. So where we have the arcade, that would have been taller all the way up, but it had much taller towers at both ends. And there was also challenges because of the depot operation really consumes the northern third of that building, so it's very hard to get that. There's all kinds of challenges with duplicate vertical circulation and things that just made it economically infeasible.
I mean, I love the activation, as Amy was saying. I think activating the space is incredible, and I think the historic structure is going to be, I'm incredibly pleased it's going to be preserved and have so much more viability to it. I have to say, and I don't know, I haven't really thought this through from our perspective. The height is one thing, and I haven't looked at what it would look like 20 feet shorter, or whatever it is. But the view from looking at it west from the front of it is okay. When I look at it from a side profile, it actually is more jarring to me because it feels like it is so dominating the poor Union Pacific building. And being able to see the building from the front of it, over the wings, over the sides, it looks like it's about to eat the little Union Pacific building. And then I think, I really think it is incredibly unfortunate. I mean, I am not a fan of the look of Gateway and the remodel of it. I think looks like it's a teenager going through some hormonal problems. But I don't know what it's trying to do, is what I'm trying to say. It's white here, it's the old stucco here, it's got a lit up clock tower over here. I have no idea what it's doing. The best part of the Gateway is walking up those steps and seeing this beautiful historic structure, and this blocks that. So, you know, I think that's kind of unfortunate for the Gateway. I think it's a loss for the whole thing. I think it's a gain in the sense that you're creating an incredible product and will obviously be a huge boon to the mall and to the city. But I think it's a sort of a loss from that sort of historic perspective. And I don't know, I think I'll be a little surprised if Historic Landmarks will be excited about it. Those are my initial thoughts.
I'm in a similar place for Weston is. I mean, but I don't know. I mean, we're also trying to figure out the challenges of how you accomplish what you want to accomplish from a property owner, and but still also, I think it's instead of just high. I mean, I feel like it's just hidden. That whole historic side of the West is just kind of hidden back there, and that's a challenge.
I like it.
Anyone else? Well,
I just want to tell you about the Athens group. These are not like second-rate people at all. They
you need to be down by the microphone.
Their portfolio includes something that you all probably seen is the Montage up at Deer Valley. And they have that acumen and that wheelhouse of that space. So this is a quality, first-rate developer of these type of projects. And it is one that they've got the finest, some of the finest architects in the country that have come together to look at this project out here to understand the nuances and really take Gateway. And Amy, I think you nailed it. It's the revitalization of that area down there. And I think just to the north of you, eventually you're probably going to have a new building that will probably tie into that and complement that on that whole thing. And that's one thing that we've talked about too. So it's a first class, and we're fortunate to have them come to Utah.
Great.
Thank you very much for your time tonight. That was really very helpful for us to get your feedback, and we hope to be back in front of you soon.
Okay, we look forward to it. Thank you. Any other business? Then we're done.